or what states it is. Is it Oregon, places like that, where they have the hop farms? Maybe.
Oh yeah. It's like Washington State. Yeah. So it's a way up, yeah. Portland, Seattle. Fucking Seattle. Yakima. That's mad. What's the...
Let's open this door a little bit. It's fucking hot in here.
It's the same. That Conflux. Yum. Where's Owen? Is that a quick one tonight? So I can go to bed? 8, 9, 10, 11. Fuck. I sleep. It was no, I was driving we got the Luton van, the big Luton. So I picked that up. Me and my brother picked it up. I drove it. Went to my sister's house. Cheryl was off. She was working, so it was just Scott, my brother-in-law, and his best mate. And then we just loaded up the house. And it loaded up the house into the Luton van. And then off to Stirling. So she was in Glasgow. They were renting. They've just bought their first house. So, yeah, knackered. Yeah, that'd be good. Yeah, I'll need to have a screen up with the YouTube then. Yeah. What is this? Oh, Messenger's up. Quit that. What else is open? Safari, don't need that. Oh, quit. Finder, quit. There he is, Talk of the Devil.
Hey guys.
Ba-bam! Hang on, I need to switch to headphones.
I would have been online half an hour ago had I not just spilt 3/4 of a pint of pale ale up the stairs.
Oh.
I'm a sweaty mess now. Just to clear that up.
Oh.
It literally was about 3/4 of the way up, and it just went slow motion. And then there was a waterfall coming down the stairs. Grim. Oh, okay. Hold on. I've got YouTube open. looking swish. Oh, nice. Nice. Very cool. Yeah.
Chris, just so you know, we've got audio live on that still.
Am I think so.
Yeah.
There we go. Put the scrolling Patreons back on the bottom. Hello, YouTubes. There we go.
Like, mother.
Right. Hang on. Wait there. I need my desktop audio off and I need my browser on so we don't get that horrible echo. Oh, here we go. Hang on a sec. I'm going to put Canadian Jim up. Canadian Jim says, hello from Alberta.
Hello, Jim. From Alberta.
Owen, your audio's really low.
Yeah, you're muted.
Hello, Jim, from wherever you said you were from.
Alberta.
Alberta,
Yeah,
Canada.
cool.
There you go, Owen. You can look. It's at the bottom of the chat on YouTube, mate.
Oh, yes, I can't have that many windows open, to be quite honest with you.
With the size of your monitor.
Yeah. I did learn a nifty trick this week about how you can split screen by pressing the Windows button and left or right.
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
It's a good one, isn't it?
It works really well.
Right then.
Does it work with
Turn
down
that
as
off.
well? It does. It
Turn
does
that back
work.
on.
Yeah.
Okay, who wants to do the launch today?
I think it's got to be Tricky, surely.
That's it? Has it got to be me?
Yeah, it's the West Coast episode. Come on.
Okay. All right.
All right.
Right, we've got a little blurb on the notes there that I can follow, which makes it easy. Okay. Good evening and welcome to the Hop Edition, sponsored by Brewkeg Tap, your source for dispensing, Firmzilla, Brewzilla, and much more. Check them out at www.brewkegtap.com and tell them the Hop Edition sent you if you do place an order. So on tonight's pod, the four horsemen have assembled to talk about West Coast style IPAs. We've been talking quite a bit recently, I think, about West Coast coming back and them being a bit of an antidote to the proliferation of sweet, juicy, hazy, full-bodied IPAs. And tonight we're going to talk a bit about brewing them. So, yeah, let's get into the Westies, fellas.
Okay. Can I just give a quick shout out to our Patreons?
Go for it.
If you're looking on the YouTube screen, you will see all of your names scrolling along the bottom because we said that we were going to do that. And now it's done. So if you're a Patreon, thank you very much. Some of you have occasional nicknames in there, like Swedish Thomas and Mr. Suxamethionone. Other than that, J Fork's in there as J Fork because I often forget his name. But there are loads of Patrons and we thank you all. You're making things really cool for us. But at the same time, if you want to be a part of our Patreons, it's www.patreon.com/The Hop Edition Podcast.
Thanks, Patreons.
Your name wasn't on the list when I looked, Gary.
We really appreciate it.
This is an outrage.
Tricky went pretty Hollywood voiceover on that intro.
Did I? Did you like that?
It was good. It was like tonight.
Was it like a movie trailer?
It was. I was expecting like explosions.
Coming to a screen near you, West Coast IPAs. Enjoy.
Your name's not on it, Gary. I think you'll find it is, mate.
You've got. I can see a Graham Hughes.
It's not in alphabetical order, but you know.
In between Brett Simmons and Johnny Pollock.
Yep, there he is.
Oh, he is there.
There he is. Boo hiss.
Yeah, it's almost like I've just edited it, isn't it?
You wouldn't have just a second put that in, would you? No way.
Sorry, Gary. Gary the Hitman Hughes.
Very nice. Very nice. So, guys, what are we all drinking?
Very nice.
Very good. Very nice. Right.
What are we drinking?
What are we drinking?
Everyone's on juicy, hazy pale ales, aren't they?
Yeah, pretty much.
No.
What?
No. What are we drinking? I'm going to go first because this is one of the worst beers I think I've ever made. This is IPL, it's called Fuck Tricky version 7. And this is my nipple recipe, but I cocked up. The first time I ever made a beer with Enigma, I ended up with this really horrible bitterness. It's friggin' horrible. I've given it near enough 2 weeks in the keg. It should have calmed down by now. All the greenness has gone, but I'm left with this really horrible bitterness. So I've got a keg of beer that I need to throw down the drain tomorrow because I ain't drinking any more of that shit.
How old is it?
It's it was cold crashed for a week. It's been in the keg for about 2 weeks.
Chris Camden.
No, it's shit. It's going down the drain. Drain, mate. Drain.
Give it another month or two.
Give it another. Okay. On your advice, Andy, I'm going to give this 2 months. And if it's crap, in a month,
then you can toss it.
Then I'm going to give you shit and I'm going to toss it.
Did you taste the wort, Chris? Or the what? The wort?
I don't often drink unfermented wort. No.
Oh, you don't?
Did you taste it after, as it went into the fermenter or anything?
No.
I was just wondering if that bitterness came across in the.
That's a fair point. Maybe I should add that as part of my routine.
I always do that.
I think it's good practice.
Yeah. See, when I take my final, my gravity, my OG, I tend to take a wee sip, and then from that, if it's going to be a good beer or not. Sometimes,
because it's funny you say that, Chris. Because my house pale ale. I'm not sure if you guys remember having drunk quite a lot of this at the Unity weekend, but I've got a similar sort of bitterness to it that that I think's come from the dry hop, and it's not awful, but I think, you know, when we were talking to Matt from Track on Wednesday, he was talking about the cohumulan oil content of certain hops
Been really high.
can add quite a lot of. And I'm not sure, did he say that was from the whirlpool, from the dry hop? I think he said it was dry hopping, didn't he?
I think he did, yeah.
Yeah, and I ended up using, I think it might be the Motueka that I put in the dry hop.
Wow.
I don't know.
Yeah.
I can't be certain.
Although Motueka's you have to use a lot of it to get anything from it. So,
Well, I think I did a double batch and I put a total of 660 grams.
of Motueka.
No, just total dry hop. But the Motueka was like pretty up there.
Mate, that's like a 300 gram on a standard batch. That is a lot.
It was like 15
hops.
gram per litre dry hop.
Yeah, but
So
then
pretty
speaking to Track, that's low.
Yeah. I mean, but it was only like a 4% pale ale. You know, we're not talking like an
8%.
8% dipper. You know what I mean? So still pretty sizable, but
Yeah, for me that sounds insane. Like that kind of dry hop. That's probably as much as I would ever want to go. Sometimes I find when you put in too much mosaic, like up at 180 grams, it just gets kind of
oniony,
I get sickly, sort of.
diesely.
No, it's too.
It keeps shouting.
Yeah, too sweet. No, it's kind of like it almost goes like that oxidized strawberry, sort of too strawberry jam.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Although that said, it could have been the Azaka I added, because I'm just looking at a chart in terms of the.
I was going to say that's quite high up on that chart, isn't it?
It is, and it seems actually quite a few of the Australian hops. So that the very top of the list is Vic Secret, second is Topaz, and Azaka is on
there somewhere as well.
Azaka is on the list, and I used a hefty amount of Azaka in the dry hop. I may as well tell you what it is that I'm drinking. I'm drinking my house pale ale.
Oh, right, okay.
So that's what I'm drinking right now.
That's a fantastic beer, mate.
Which is it is a nice beer, but it has picked up this kind of weird bitterness to it. Which
it did have a higher bitterness than your Conflux.
It does sort of balance it out, but I think it hides some of that sort of juice character that I was looking for, because I think it's interesting when you talk about, and I know we're going to talk about West Coast IPAs, and maybe those will come into kind of conversation later on. But actually, certainly the way that people perceive juicy, hazy IPAs in the UK is that it's the sweetness that accentuates the juice hop character, right? Because it's kind of, as well as the mouthfeel. And I think when you end up having a high level of bitterness, that balances out that sweetness. It brings that sweetness down, and then you tend not to get quite such a sort of juicy perception of the beer, and it becomes just more balanced, I think.
Yeah, that's cool.
So there's quite a lot of aroma on the beer, but on the flavour, it's just a bit more of a kind of, it is hoppy, but it's definitely more balanced and not quite as juicy as kind of I was hoping for, really. So it's ended up a bit more West Coast than it has hazy pale ale, to be honest.
Has it got the kind of lime things going on?
It has, yeah. It's got like a real pithy citrus tropical vibe going on, yeah. So yeah, that's what I'm drinking. What are you drinking, Andy?
I've got the Conflux clone, mate, that we got, that Jimmy sorted us out with, and it is a banger.
You enjoying it?
Yeah, it's got the Citra vibes, but then it's got the pink grapefruit zest on the end. So when it's just left in your tongue now, I'm just getting that grapefruit. It's just beautiful. And get that kind of fluffy. The amount of adjuncts that went into that, it's nice and kind of soft, but then it's got a nice zesty finish, so it makes you want to go back in for more. So
yeah, it's a super pillowy kind of beer, isn't it? Considering its ABV, I think it's that wheat content. I think really adds a nice fluffiness to the beer. It's an amazing grist. It's quite a simple grist actually, but Jimmy's absolutely nailed that grist.
Yeah, it's like flaked wheat, flaked oats, wheat, and base.
Did he use flaked wheat or torrefied wheat?
Flaked, is it not? It's that big puffy stuff that you get. It's like crushed. It looks like has been hit with a hammer or something. The wheat kernel, the wheat's been,
completely flattened. Yeah, they run it through like steel rollers, don't they? And like to get it super flat. I use torrefied wheat. I'm not quite sure what they do to wheat to make it torrefied, but
it's like gluten. It's sugar. It caramelizes the sugar or something, maybe, or
no idea. It almost looks like it's been popped. Like a sort of almost like not quite popcorn, but
so maybe it's baked. Well, kind of the caramelization sort of thing going on. Maybe.
I'm glad it came out well, Andy. I think obviously the kit for Conflux is available to purchase from the malt miller. You can also purchase whilst you're there cans of Conflux.
And
other Unity beers. So if anyone fancies having a go at the Conflux recipe that Andy is drinking right now, then head over to the malt miller and check out the recipe kit there.
I've got a can of Conflux in the house. I bought 4 cans of Conflux actually.
It's a great beer.
I've drank 3 of them already, and the other one I'll do a review on my YouTube channel when I do a video thing and do the comparison. I think mine's ended up a bit drier, so mine's I think ended up 10.009 instead of 10.11. I believe.
I think I had the same thing when I brewed mine.
So, but then mine, my rollers were misaligned. So then I wasn't getting as much efficiency. So I think my starting gravity was slightly lower. So it's ended up 4.6 instead of 4.8. So
okay.
And I know you had great efficiency on your zone, and it ended up a much stronger beer, didn't it?
I think it did actually, but I think it dried out a little more. That's why. So I overshot a few points, but it also dropped lower than I was expecting. That's I used a different yeast. I think I used Verdant rather than.
I used
London Ale 3.
I used that London Ale 3, yeah.
But I think I don't know whether you just need to adjust the mash temp. I wonder if it's just a scaling thing.
Yeah, and like when we were talking on Wednesday night about the 72-degree mash temperature, I'm quite keen on trying that. And maybe on my kit, I think what I'm getting wrong is my initial strike temps aren't matching up at the minute. I'm struggling to get that, and then I'm using the coil, what do you call it, the HLT, to then heat it back up to the right temp. And I think that's why I'm having these issues with the kind of final gravity being a little bit lower. Because my beers have always been a little bit drier than normal, maybe a 10.008 or something, or 10.10 when it wants to be a bit higher.
I think mash thickness can also contribute to that as well.
Yeah, I've been trying that on. I have been doing instead of going with the recipe says on Brewfather, I've been eyeballing it to try and get a bit of a thicker mash. So that might mean half a litre less than what my Brewfather will say. And then that just gets me that slightly thicker mash. And maybe that's why I'm not, another one of the things is why I'm maybe not quite hitting my temps and stuff. But
also your efficiency maybe. I think sometimes it's harder to get a decent efficiency out of a thicker mash as well.
Yeah, and don't forget, we're just brewing this as a one-off. If you were to do this several times over, then you would be able to tweak that recipe into what it should be and dial it in sort of thing. So as homebrewers, I don't think we're into drinking the same beer all the time. You want to try and get something a bit different, don't you?
Well, speak for yourself. I think Chris is a pretty avid
repeat
brewer. I've actually taken to rebrewing quite a lot of beers these days.
Yeah.
But I think Conflux might be one of those rebrew beers on my list.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's so fantastic, and the recipe is like pretty nailed on. So
Yeah, and Citra Idaho 7, you know,
yeah,
it's a good combo.
I think the number of iterations for Chris is very reflective of a scientific approach to the recipe development for sure.
What are you trying to say, Tricky? Are you trying to say I'm a complete geek?
Yeah.
I'll wear that as a badge of honor, son.
I know, I need like that anyway. So
you nerd.
Hey, the bottom line is, in order to achieve the best of what you want, you have to accept some failure, some change before you get there. It's as simple as that.
Has everyone else done what they're drinking, by the way?
We're waiting for Owen.
No, I've done mine.
And then I did mine. Oh no, I've
okay.
even. Yeah, I've talked about it, don't I?
I better. Well,
Tricky.
I thought I'd drink a West Coast IPA for the West Coast episode. So this is my own one. I actually talked about this on. Can't remember which pod it was, but a pod 2 or 3 episodes back. It's got a little bit better since then. I wasn't that keen on it at the time. Still not quite as clear as I wanted it to be, but it's got the kind of sort of orangey, darker, well, not dark amber, but more amber kind of color to it. So it has got a little bit of crystal malt in there for that slightly more old school look and flavor profile. It's got some of the more traditional hops in there, like Simcoe and Cascade and Columbus, I think. I can't remember. I should have got the recipe up, but we're going to talk more about yeast and things like that later on in the episode. But this one I did do with Voss, which I think Andy has talked about using for West Coast IPAs before.
Yep, give that orange.
And it definitely does add to that kind of orange, sort of piney, resiny edge to it.
Yeah, it's a good
bit
choice.
Bit on the fence as to whether I'd rather have a slightly crisper yeast in there, but it does definitely give you that kind of like extra orange rind kind of tang that I think is definitely, it definitely has that kind of like West Coast IPA flavor profile in terms of the citrus rind and all that kind of stuff.
Tricky.
So
you sure it's not a lager?
I mean,
pretty sure.
Pretty certain this one's not a lager. Didn't use the loop.
He's away.
Andy's out.
See ya. Is he actually gone?
He's done. That's it. No more Chris.
Oh well.
Anyway, moving on.
Oh, he's back. He's back.
Oh, he's back. All right, he just had a moment.
Wankers. Right. So we've done what you're drinking. We've said thank you to our Patreons. We've also mentioned Brewcake Tap. Incidentally, we have it confirmed that Johnny from Brewcake Tap is going to be joining us on an episode. And I had an email from the gentleman. I won't go into too many of the details of the email. However, one part stuck out for me, which is he wants to brew a beer before he comes on our podcast. I can't wait for this. This is going to be awesome.
Is he going to send us some?
Should be sort of mandatory, shouldn't it?
I don't know, but I'm sure that, if I was to drop him another email, we might be able to get a bottle of it to try. Who knows?
I think there's room for negotiation there, surely, isn't there?
I mean, absolutely. Yeah.
Absolutely.
If Track can send us like 8 dippers each.
Yeah, that was a painful day.
Yeah. I mean,
you guys recovered
I only had 3. I only had 3, but
the hangover was real. Yeah.
I had first day of school, dropping the kids off, and all. Look at the pictures, because it was Jessica's P1, starting actual primary school, and I was absolutely sick of shit, man. Absolutely dying.
Wow. Well, at least it's memorable.
Oh yeah, totally.
Brilliant.
Oh dear.
It was a fun podcast. But talking about future podcasts, we do have a lot of very, very exciting podcasts in the pipeline at various stages of development. I don't want to give too many spoilers, but we have got other professional brewers from big headline named breweries. We've got yeast companies. We've got homebrewing manufacturers. We've got a lot of really exciting
some retailers lined up as well as Johnny.
some really cool stuff. So
yeah, it's exciting actually.
Yeah, I think what's really exciting is thanks to the Patreons, thanks to kind of everything we've been doing the last kind of 6 months, is the podcast is going from strength to strength. So big shout out to everyone for contributing.
Yeah, massive thanks to everybody who's been listening, everybody who's been coming on, the people who've been talking to us, and more importantly, to the Patreons for making things happen. Because we were having a conversation the other day about a trip that we may be able to make and some footage that Andy is going to video and turn into an amazing montage. And
don't need to do the last one.
Yeah, we're going to be having some fun with this podcast moving forward, guys. There is a lot of really cool stuff in the pipeline. So keep listening to the Hop Edition, because even though I have to say this is episode 50, this is a massive episode for us. We're keeping it low key. We're going with the Westies because we're not one of these podcasts that likes to. It's episode 50. We must do this. Episode 50 is episode 50, and it's an important episode. But don't
lie, Chris. We wanted to do a Q&A and we were too slow and asking people for
we just didn't sort it out properly, did we? So we've gone for the fallback plan.
Too many other things in the pipeline.
So backup is the one that's been in the notes.
Honestly, we've had a lot of people wanting to come on the podcast, and we've been desperately scragging around for dates, trying to get this one sorted. So it's kind of the Q&A episode that we want to do has yet to come to fruition. We'll probably do that around episode 53 or something, because 53 is a bigger number than 50, therefore it's obviously more important.
53 is
better. To be fair, there's been an awful lot of episodes that we haven't classified with a number, and they've been commercial podcasts, and are we really on 50? Who knows?
Ooh.
Who knows?
It's a good point. It's a good point that you make there, Owen.
It's just it's just a number, like age.
Okay.
Oh shit!
You're only as old as the women you feel. Is that how it goes?
Something like that.
Yeah.
We better start talking about West Coast IPAs, guys.
We probably ought to.
We're only 25 minutes. Oh, so, we're there. We have a question which I am going to highlight. This is actually quite a good one. So, Graham Hughes, Mr. Hughes Brews, has asked us, so what is the best commercially available West Coast?
Oof.
That's a complex question.
Punk IPA.
Shut up.
That's not even a West Coast IPA.
Get out.
Get in the sea, Andy.
Yeah. This is what happens when you invite a Scotsman on, isn't it?
I mean...
it's Brewdog!
So my volley into this, right, is broadly recognised as probably one of the best West Coast IPAs. It's got to be Pliny the Elder, isn't it? Not that I haven't drunk it. Have any of you guys tried Pliny?
No, never tried it, and...
I had
virtually unattainable in the UK anyway, isn't it? I think
I had one bottle which was skunked, which was travelled, which had clearly never been stored cold, and I'll be honest with you, it was not the best beer I'd ever had. However, I do have some friends who live in Michigan, and they say it is quite literally the only beer that they drink when they're going out there.
What is it, Chris?
Bell's Two Hearted is the one that seems to win the American commercial beer competition a lot in recent years.
Owen's brewed Bell's Two Hearted.
I've done it.
Yeah.
It was one of my first brews.
I've even tried it. I tried it at London Craft Beer Festival last year. They had cans of Bell's Two Hearted. But again, it's a bit like drinking Guinness out of Ireland and, whatever else. The beer doesn't travel well. And
yeah.
I quite enjoyed it, but yeah, I mean... Would I have said it was the best West Coast IPA I've ever tried? Nah. For one can that, like you say, has come across the Atlantic in somebody's luggage, then don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I think it pertains to the model of a more classic West Coast IPA. I think much like Pliny does, I guess, right? It's traditional, old school West Coast IPAs, and I'm sure we'll probably end up talking about. I think it's all Centennial actually. Bell's Two Hearted, which is amazing. Centennial, they call that supercharged Cascade, don't they?
Super grapefruit, super.
I think one of the other problems is a lot of breweries, obviously, with their kind of rotating beer lineups nowadays, you might have. I mean, I've drunk loads of really good, sort of slightly more modern interpretations of the West Coast IPA from breweries like Track recently. That I can't say to somebody, "I'll go and buy that one," because it's only on their shop for like 2 weeks and then it's gone, isn't it? So
yeah, the one-off specials.
You can reference back to the kind of OG beers like Jaipur and stuff like that, but that's not my favorite West Coast IPA by a long stretch at all.
I think as with many beer styles, they go through a process of metamorphosis, right? In terms of the fact that they travel over the Atlantic, or they in fact cross from one coast to the other in America, and the style develops and changes. I mean, this style's been around for probably as long as craft beer as a term has been around, right? It's pretty much started,
if not longer,
the craft beer scene in America, which is kind of eventually blossomed to us.
When did you guys feel the craft beer scene really started for you in the UK? Because I was thinking about this. I was speaking to one of the boys, my brother-in-law's best mate, and he was talking about the Black Isle Brewery. And I remember drinking that before craft was a thing for me, really. And it was the blonde. And I was, I think they probably used like a modern American hop, but it was probably back then, it was like, wow, what is this? Really nice, kind of juicy sort of blonde ale, I think. And I've talked about the Aaron blonde as well, using Cascade. And it's sort of, that new sort of juice sort of thing that you get from it, the grapefruit or whatever.
Yeah.
It was a bit of a game change. So I just wonder, for you guys, what year that change was?
No, at the point that I first became aware of what would be classed as craft beers, that craft beer as a term wasn't being used really by anyone, but it wasn't British beers at that point. My first experience of anything like that would have been when I was at uni, and there was a little kind of trendy bar in town that had like decent beers on, and they'd have like proper European lagers and stuff rather than just your usual piss water, but they'd also have a few of the American beers in as well, and it was basically Sierra Nevada and Goose Island IPA, the other Goose Island one, Honkers Ale or something like that, I think one of them. But they had those beers in, and that would have been like 2003, 2004, probably when I was first trying those. So that was the first time I became aware of like hoppy beers
2004.
in that kind of style. But it wasn't like everyone was going, "Oh, it's craft beer. Try this craft beer," or whatever. That wouldn't have, to me, really become terminology until Brewdog started popping up everywhere. And as much as everyone likes to, bag on them, the craft beer scene was pretty much, down to them and not Jaipur, Formbridge, really, as the companies that sort of took on that lead from people like Sierra Nevada and those guys, and then took it forwards with their own beers, which in a lot of cases were basically their interpretations of American IPAs or pale ales, as far as I'm concerned.
Can I just throw something in here, because it's more of a more complicated question than it actually sounds like right from the outset, okay? But oh dear.
Who's that? Is that Chris? Someone's got a flipping.
Nah,
Chris has either followed through or there's a boy racer outside.
No, there's a bloke who lives around the corner who's just bought himself a 5-litre Mustang.
That's what I thought, American.
Big ass
V8. He heard you were doing the American IPA episode, so he thought he'd just rev it up for you.
To be fair, he's a really nice bloke, and his kids often ride up and down the hill on their bike. So, I've met him a few times. He's a good bloke. Anyway, what do you mean by craft beer? Because my definition of craft beer would be anything which is produced small batch.
Yeah, I mean, okay, that's your definition now. But I think back then, what I'm thinking is, I'm probably 2010 to 2014 was the transition sort of period of, it was like the small bottle shop, and then you would be able to get the Bristol Beer Factory or whatever it is, or like the Black Isle stuff, that sort of thing. They were coming out maybe with some crazy porters or blonde ales, but it wasn't the whole pale ale or IPA thing wasn't the style hitting at the time for me anyway. There was maybe a coffee infused porter, and it was like, freaking, this is awesome.
But for me,
and that's craft beer. Maybe
between about 20, in fact, probably about 2008 until about 2016, I didn't drink.
All right, okay.
Like I probably had, in those 8 years, I probably had 10 pints, maybe 12 in total.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't drink. It wasn't that I didn't want to, but I was driving everywhere. I was working a good old distance. It was a 50-mile drive every day to work. I couldn't really afford. I just couldn't really. I just couldn't afford to drink, because it was always, I was working. I maybe had to be in at work at 2:00 in the morning to do a changeover. I couldn't really afford the time to be able to drink like that. Yeah. So, yeah, that was kind of me. But my first introduction to the craft beer world as it is now was undoubtedly, it was a bottle of Jaipur.
Really?
Yeah. I don't particularly like it.
Mm.
But at the point where I drank the Jaipur, in fact, no, it wasn't Jaipur. It was Sierra Nevada Pale Ale. And it was at the Smokehouse in Wakefield when we went in there, because it was the only thing that they had that wasn't fucking Carling or Foster's. And they had that, and they had Guinness. And I'm not being funny. I am not drinking liquid food when I'm trying to completely destroy a menu.
I remember the first funny beer I had was like Blue Moon.
Oh, Blue Moon's lovely. I don't care what anyone says, it's a lovely one.
Yeah, no, it's good.
That was another one of the beers that was actually in that bar that I was talking about. They had that very early on. And
with
it was
with a
much
slice
better
of orange.
than,
with
slice
of orange, yeah.
Yeah, for me it was Sierra Nevada. And also some of the Brewdog beers, like Punk IPA, and I think that's kind of when I started probably becoming more conscious. I was probably more of a wine drinker before I sort of turned to craft, to be fair.
Totally believe it as well.
Yeah.
I'd like to say it's cheaper than buying good wine, but it's really about the same price, isn't it? Really?
Your beer reviewing style suddenly makes so much sense now, Owen. There's background in wine.
But no, it's decent. It's decent.
Bit of that Jilly Cooper sort of approach to it.
Reminds me of a drop of dew coming from the eyelid of a fallow deer.
Wow. In other news, we have a gentleman by the name of G. Kuto who is finally catching us live. He's actually there, so I've highlighted his message. Thank you very much for joining us, man. Welcome to the party.
Good to see you live.
Thanks, G.
G-Man.
Anyway, we're 35 minutes in. I'm not sure we've really talked about West Coast IPAs.
We haven't really started, have we?
So
I think we're talking about our journey.
Tricky. Come on. Someone tell me.
Briefly touched on a few beers which are kind of critical there in the history of West Coast beers and IPAs. And I think we talked about this before the pod started, that the documentary that Craft Beer Channel have recently done, if you just go and watch that pretty much covers it, because it's all about the history of the the big hops that influenced beers, and Cascade Centennial, which we've mentioned several times already, and then later your Simcoes and your Citras, maybe not so much the Citra and Mosaic in terms of like the old school West Coast IPAs, but definitely the other ones. That development of those hops is basically where you then see your Sierra Nevadas, your what was the Racer 5 was the one they were talking about, Pliny the Elder, and those beers, Centennial, they're based on those hops that came out. So that's obviously how it happened in America, and then for better or worse, the British craft beer scene was us basically following on along those lines. So
Just
I
to
think-
put a bit of a pin in at this point, Tricky, whilst you're talking about it.
Yeah,
Modern
go on.
British Beer by Matt
Curtis.
Curtis. We had Matt on the podcast,
Mhm.
and I swear to God, I don't think either of us have ever talked so little during a podcast. The history, I've sat down and read this book cover to cover twice, and I have to say, aside from a few sections of it being quite somnoletic, the actual book itself is really good for giving you a really clear, not so much concise, but a crystal clear kind of history of modern British beer and where it goes and what it actually is all about. And it's a very, very good book. And if you haven't read it, I'm going to say, personally, from my point of view, you should buy a copy and you should read it.
Yeah, you could even use it as your guide to selecting the breweries that you want to get your next cans from or something, you know?
I have to say, Wylam Brewery has been underrated within my drinking over the last 5 years or so. And that's getting remedied because my next beer order is going into Wylam.
They're excellent.
What's Wylam's like real headline core beer? It's supposed to be really good. Jakehead, yeah. Yeah, that's
one of them anyway, isn't it?
Pretty famous beer.
It's a great beer.
Yeah, are they Newcastle, aren't they?
Yes.
Newcastle?
Yes.
Newcastle, mate, yeah.
Yeah.
We might have to take a trip up to Newcastle, boys.
They have their own,
Yes.
or they did have their own
Could be
festival
worse.
thing, didn't they?
They did, yeah. Because they've got a very cool brewery,
or
haven't
something
they?
like that. Yeah.
Yeah.
The very cool brewery. It's a big circular building, isn't it?
Okay, so after
yeah.
we've done Manchester, we're going to do Newcastle.
Yeah.
Anyway, let's pull it back. We're basically copping out a bit on the history of the Westie because we've talked about a load of other shit instead.
Well, the thing is, like,
we get pissed up next?
thing is,
Yeah,
like,
let's
we
just
had
refer
this-
you back to somebody else's video that does it better.
We had this essay lined up, like we did the notes for this episode ages ago, and then obviously what with this Siren Time Hops craft beer channel thing that happened earlier this week, which if you've not checked out, go and check it out on YouTube. And
Because
you know,
the beards are amazing.
those beers are circulating at the moment. So in short, that was Siren doing a homage to some classic hops, which was, I think, Cascade, Centennial, Simcoe, and Citra Mosaic together.
Yep.
Of which, you know, spoiler alert, that's one of my commercial beers tonight.
Ooh.
Where was I going with that? I've lost my train of thought.
Speaking of which, for the recommendations for West Coast IPAs, the Centennial one, if you want a sort of old school, you know, Westie, that Centennial IPA in the Time Hop series is proper, you know, on the money as far as that kind of slightly more old school West Coast style goes.
Yeah, and that's the one that Siren consulted with Russian River on, wasn't it?
Vinny Chillerzo.
Yeah, Vinny Chillerzo.
I think it might have been the Race to 5 one. That was the
Centennial
was Race to 5.
It was the Simcoe one.
Was the Russian River one.
Yeah.
Which actually I thought was not the best one out of the four for me. That was probably the one that I had. However, I did drink it last, so I might have been a bit like.
If you drank that after the Citra Mosaic one, you might well have been.
That might have been part of the problem because
destroyed.
I think they did them the wrong way around in that. But anyway, carry on.
Yeah, I've only tried the Cascade one, and so the Cascade one was like the Sierra Nevada kind of homage, wasn't it? And I can't say I didn't really enjoy that beer. I enjoyed that beer, but it wasn't what I expected the beer to be. I was expecting a real, proper, pithy citrus bomb, and it actually was much more nuanced.
I really liked it, but I totally agree, and I think like they were sort of talking about how it was, you know, they tried to get it as close to Sierra Nevada as possible. For me, it was like way low on bitterness and that like aggressive kind of grapefruit thing. For me, it was way more like floral and just really soft. You know, it was like all the soft characteristics of Cascade for me without that sort of
Pithy grapefruit, yeah.
Not aggressive, but yeah, pithy is the best word.
I think you hit the nail on the head, Tricky, when you said that there was like a real rose water thing in there. It was just it was really soft, subtle, and it had this weird rose thing going on, which was pleasant, but it wasn't quite what I was expecting it to be. Sorry, Chris.
No, all I was going to say was the one saving grace, because I'm not big on the huge bitterness beers. I'm also not huge on the big ABV beers. But the one saving grace of Sierra Nevada Pale Ale, when I drank it that first time in the smokehouse in Wakefield, is that beer, exactly that beer, with that grapefruit, with that pithiness, with that good shot of bitterness. It works so well with barbecued food. It is unbelievable.
Yeah, I'll cut it.
It's almost like the blokes at Sierra Nevada have got a fucking smoker on the deck out back. And they went, well, which beer do we need in order to really cut through this? Oh, I don't know. Let's come up with something. We've got this new hop called Cascade. Let's give it a shot. And then next thing, boom, you've got the perfect beer to go with ribs. That is my thing. It is the perfect beer for ribs.
I think it's almost like when you're having something quite fatty, you either need like pickles, which is like sourness to cut through it, almost as a palate cleanser, or you go bitterness.
Yep.
Which also then sort of cleanses your palate of that kind of fat.
Absolutely.
So it's a great. I'd agree with that wholeheartedly.
And that's my segue into basically saying I think the history of the West Coast beer was the new hops with a specific style of beer with a little bit of sweetness from some crystal malts, with a little bit, a decent body, but that punch of bitterness which came from these hops, because clearly they were just experimenting and put them in at different points during the brewing process. I think the West Coast IPA was new hops on the scene with an old malt bill, because it's not too dissimilar to an amber malt bill when you
English. Almost an English IPA grist, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's very similar to that, but you've got these new hops, and they've just gone, let's jump in both feet and see what we can come up with. A voila, Pliny the Elder appears out of nowhere, and all of a sudden, Bell's Two-Hearted, and then it's the greatest beer on earth. And I think that it was simply somebody taking an English IPA base with an American hop schedule and going with it and producing something truly magical. And then
that's pretty much what they unpackaged and played on for the best part of what, like 15, 20 years. Yeah.
And it's those particular breweries, like they talk about in the documentary, that picked up on those new hops and flew the flag for them, I guess, while everyone else was going, no, that's that needs to be binned off. So I think there's a very small number of those original brewers that really probably kept those hop varieties alive for long enough for other people to pick up on them. And that's what kind of a big point they make in the documentary, which I thought was really interesting, because essentially the hop growers were saying these varieties were mostly destined for the bin until certain brewers took the
just
took the brave decision to sort of roll with it. Yeah.
What's wrong with a lager, dickhead?
No, but like Terence or Stella or
so
Carlin.
If you then take, just to follow the history of the West Coast, if you then take what we've just talked about with these breweries in America taking what we feel is essentially an English grist for an IPA, putting these new fruity hops on, these C hops, because essentially most of them began with C. You've got these hops then going on, and all of a sudden you've then got people from the UK, from breweries such as Roosters, Wylam, Jaipur, Thornbridge, You've got all these people who clearly have then visited America to see what's going off on the other side of the Atlantic. They've brought those hops with them, and they've done, well, this is massive over there. Let's see what we can produce over here. And then, you've got all of these wonderful beers being produced in this country, and the absolute explosion of the craft beer scene over here, because you can pretty much trace it back to that time. the explosion of these beers.
I think you're quite right, Chris. And I think, you know, when you go back to kind of the lineage of the use of these new hops, a lot of that was about the changing palate and the acceptance of the change in beer, particularly for America. And I think, you know, they were much like the UK to some extent 30 years later. We were a nation of lager drinkers, and then all of a sudden something new comes along, and it's like, this is weird, this is different. And some people will go, nah, mate, that's not for me. Get me a pint of Carling. And others will go, yeah, that's really interesting. Like, I like that. Let's get some more of that. And I think certainly going back to the West Coast IPA, it was really out there, I think, for its time, obviously.
Oh, definitely.
But clearly more exciting and not for everyone. There's still an awful lot of light lager drinkers in America.
But you go back to the UK at that particular time, and I remember reading somewhere that it was LBB. It was lagers, bitters, and what was the other one? LBB. Lagers, bitters, and
Beavers.
Something else. No, something else that begins with B anyway. But that was essentially what it was. It was a very boring drinking culture. Oh, lagers, blondes, and bitters. That's what it was. And that kind of sums up. You've got lager drinkers who were drinking your Carling and your Fosters and whatever. Blonde drinkers who wanted something off of a hand pull, but still wanted that light style. And then you had bitters, which was your granddad down the pub. Aside from that, there was nothing really. Obviously, there was Guinness and stuff like that, but really, it was LBB. All of a sudden, this explosion of these New World hops coming in, it completely changed the face. It could completely change the entire the entire vista that was beer in this country. As soon as companies like Roosters, like Thornbridge, like Wylam, like all of these other amazing breweries that we're talking about over here, once they started producing these beers, you end up with this phenomenal range. I mean, you can walk into a shop right now and you can buy a caramel strawberry sour IPA, but you can also get Tennant's Extra.
No, can you?
I mean, most of it's in Italy.
Not in the shop I go.
Yeah.
But you've got all of these different beers, and then the Westie for me, whilst it's not my pinnacle of beer styles, the West Coast IPA I think has influenced craft beer more than any other style of beer.
Yeah. Well,
I'd agree with that. Absolutely.
Westies, Andy's sitting there.
It started the entire obsession with hops. I think
did.
In terms of it created what effectively is American hops. And like when you talk about craft beer in the UK, what we're really talking about is beers made with American hops. Well, that's moved on, okay, because then we've had Australia and New Zealand and those guys come to the fore. But really, if you rewind it,
those hops have been developed to emulate American hops in different countries. So you can't really go, they have their craft beer thing, because it's the same style beers, just with their own hops that they've produced to try and be their version of a Cascade or a Simcoe or whatever.
I don't know if you guys are missing the point. I think in America, the craft beer scene is because of their laws that's encouraged this sort of tap room and brew house together, and you can only sell in your state, sort of small brewery type thing, where everything's more mechanical, done by hand. And so, and whereas in the UK we've had it was always like the big massive conglomerate breweries that were all your kind of lagers and stuff, and that whole scene has now it's brought and it's encouraged an absolute boom of small breweries, and some of those small breweries are now absolutely massive. So yeah,
I want to take this opportunity to utilize a new thing that I've developed for the stream. Those guys who are on the chat right now, What do you think? Are we talking shit? If you've got any questions, let us know. But the point is, we have this new tool. I want to be a little bit more interactive. If you have a question or anything like that, bring it up. I'll stick it up on the screen.
If
we'll
it's
cover
good.
it. If it's good. If it's good. Nothing about Russian women or anything like that.
No shit questions, please.
Yeah, no shit questions.
I don't know, Andy. I think I understand. I think you're onto something there, but how is that any different to? I guess we had our own.
I'm not putting that up, Luke.
We had our own British kind of.
Were they not craft? Well, were they craft?
Originally,
probably not. They would class themselves as real ale brewers.
Well, yeah, that's true. But equally, it's like, well, we don't want to get into like what's the definition of craft beer because we've talked about that.
We have done that,
to its depth, right?
Yeah.
But originally, like you go through a process, or it starts out as breweries, local breweries producing beer for their local community.
Yeah, and I wonder,
and then you get big conglomerates coming along, and then everyone gets bored with that, and people start to return to kind of something different. And I think that's exactly what happened in America, right? And then it migrated across
access to hops
across the Atlantic, right? But what we're really talking about here is the West Coast IPA.
But do you think it was delayed as well because of access to hops? You think in the UK, maybe originally, it took time to actually get access to these types of hops as well, which is why there's probably a big lag because they'd be using what was locally available at the time.
Yeah, I would agree with that to some extent, but it's also the interest to want to use those hops, and I think the whole start of this conversation was, I think whoever made the point about the West Coast IPA, I think it was Chris, being probably the most influential style of beer in the last 20 to 30 years. And I think that probably is true. I agree with that. And I'd be keen for opposing opinions. And I think actually it was a lot about American hops. And then I think that came across the pond, and all of a sudden you got your roosters and your Jaipurs going, well, hold on, we got Cascade. That's really interesting. We want more of that, and blah blah blah. And then it's blossomed into today's craft beer scene, really. But anyway,
we could sit here and we could argue about this literally for hours.
Yes,
however,
all about.
The one thing that I want to talk about, I want to get this done and out of the way because it's fucking BJCP, okay? BJCP guideline style 14A is what I've sort of come to as being the West Coast.
Can we, Chris? Can we just put the brakes on the style guidelines for a second?
Okay.
Can we just talk about briefly? Probably won't be briefly. What is a West Coast IPA? Let's just talk about what do we think a West Coast IPA is.
So I think it kind of links back to Chris going to the style guidelines in a way, because what was always called American IPA is what is now called West Coast IPA, if you know what I mean, because the old school sort of American IPAs would almost all have been regarded as Westies in the current parlance, for if you know what I mean,
American
because
IPA,
it's since that it's developed into all the sub styles of IPA that you now need that like extra definition. If that's to me how it goes. So when you're talking about things like your Goose Islands, your Racer Fives, your those sort of original American IPAs that were around, your Pliny the Elders and all that kind of stuff. Those are basically all IPAs made with a sort of fairly similar kind of approach to the malt bill, the hopping, all using sort of a lot of them classic sort of C hops as the majority for the first few examples of that style, almost exclusively Cascade Centennial for a lot of them. Lagunitas, another good example, I think, as well.
Lagunitas is a fantastic
one of
beer.
the original
ones.
ones.
Another good shout. Yeah,
that's really bitter as well.
Yeah, and when you go back to those sort of
Good.
recipes for those, you are seeing a very similar approach, which we can then sort of see reflected in the style guidelines in terms of how the recipes are put together. Yeah, so for me, that's it. Sort of classic C hops, probably some crystal in the grist for the older style version. So there's a little bit of an argument to be had on that in a bit, I think. High bitterness relative to certainly the more modern interpretations of IPAs and particularly the hazy styles.
Yep.
Probably more clarity, drier finish. That's kind of the calling cards of
But
West Coast IPAs.
but also
for me.
then like a strong hop aroma.
Yeah,
as well. Yeah. But
and that
probably
hop
more
character,
balanced,
more
like
kind of
probably a more balanced.
It's probably not
beer.
as strong as the East Coast IPA.
I think
don't
definitely
know, I
more
think
balanced in the sense that
Deeper.
when you get that higher ABV, the bitterness kind of follows it up.
Yeah.
Whereas like the more modern interpreters, I think you see that bitterness staying down, and then you get the sweeter palate because of that.
It's layering hops through the boil as well, I think, is probably one of the kind of key things to give depth and complexity and flavour on a West Coast.
Yeah, okay. And we'll probably get onto the nuances, how the style has changed. So, all right, Chris, anyway, sorry for interrupting you.
No,
as
it's
you were
no bother,
heading
mate.
into that,
These are the kind of things that we talk about because these are the things that are important when you're discussing a true Westie. So 14A American IPA, which is, as Tricky's just said, kind of morphed, kind of become the West Coast IPA. So the vital statistics are IBU range is 40 to 70. Now that interesting. Doors just blown open. 40 to 70, and that will kind of depend on the ABV range, because obviously, even though a Westie doesn't have what I would consider to be perfect balance, you do need to balance the IBUs in order to be able to balance the ABV because of the residual sugars and stuff and the sweetness that comes from the ethanol. EBC range, anything from about 11.8 to about 27.5, which is a big old range of colour. OG 1056 to about 1070. Final gravity. Now, this is where I would disagree. I don't think the final gravity should go as low as 1008. I think 1010 is about as low as it should go. However, the guidelines say 1008 to 1014, and an ABV range anything from 5.5 to 7.5. And that is, I think the 5.5 to 7.5 is taken from the original India Pale Ale, where it had to be 5.5 in order to survive the transit, but anything from about 5.5 to 7.5 before it becomes a dipper, and Owen drinks all of it. So, hey, crikey! So that's basically your vital stats of an American IPA, which is essentially a West Coast IPA, and the only difference between that and a Westie is the hopping, and I think it's more for the aroma and for the flavor, and with the dry hop, that's kind of where you get into the hopping. But the actual beer itself, the vital stats of the beer you've just been given, I don't see a problem aside from the final gravity. I think 1008 is probably a bit too low.
But I think the style is typified by that drier finish, and typically because of the water profile as well. So
yeah,
the
water profile is quite important.
Chloride ratio tends to be a higher sulfate ratio, which adds.
Do you want me to run through the water profile right now?
Yeah, if you want to talk about water profile as well, but I wanted to touch actually before we get there, in terms of the color range. The color range is quite reflective of the classic styles, as we've talked about. You know, that almost 12 EBC up to like 27.5.
I was going to say, even the low end of that is fairly high, isn't it? Like,
that is quite, that's
looking at a lot
almost
of modern
amber territory.
Orange.
Yeah.
Well, you're looking at a beer which is fairly amber in colour, aren't you, really? I mean, when we were at the Craft Beer Festival, we were all stood together at that American place the first time I went. Well, the only time I've been, but last year, or the last time we went. The one thing that really struck me about when they poured Bell's Two Hearted, or whichever one, I think it was Was it Bell's? It might be. Yeah, it was Bell's Two Hearted.
It was.
The color of it, I'm like, this is virtually a bitter.
Very
in colour.
orange. Very
It was
orange.
Day glow. It was right there. And that kind of stood out for me. I'm like, there's clearly a lot of crystal in this. And it was very sweet. It was too sweet for me, I'll be honest. But it obviously traveled a long way, and hops don't last long, and blah, 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 and all that sort of stuff. So, give it the benefit of the doubt. But like Tricky's just said, 11.8 is still pretty damn high. That's higher than you're going to get for a lot of lagers. That's higher than you're going to get for some bitters. For a lot of pale ales, it's higher. So 27.5. Geez, I can't remember what the color value is for my persistently bitter. I'm going to actually have a quick look because I'm not entirely sure. It's much higher than that.
I mean, I think the implication there is like to get that color range, you've got to have some sort of at least medium color crystal in the grist. Of around about 5%, if not more, or heavy dose of Munich maybe.
So my persistently bitter, the version that most people that have taken the recipe have done, the EBC value on that is 29.5.
Okay, so it's right. It's at the very top.
So that's what I'm saying. We're talking bitter colors here. We're talking American amber, or classic English IPA, which was always a little bit darker.
And I'm not sure like any modern West Coast IPAs are anywhere near that range.
No, not now.
I think they may be like very nearly touching the bottom of that range.
Yeah,
I think they might be lighter.
I think there'd be a lot lighter.
The new stuff's a lot
There's
lighter.
definitely a lot of them that would be probably lager malt, maybe some carapils.
Yeah,
possibly nothing else apart from a bit of, also a little dash of Munich or whatever that would be basically lager or light lager sort of color range.
Yeah, you'd be talking like max 8 EBC probably.
Like that, Chris. Yeah, exactly.
That's a Kolsch.
Yeah.
I think one other bit
but
of
that sort of color.
No, that's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
That's a fucking Kolsch.
Yeah. That's what I would expect now.
I think one other little statistic you can kind of tease out of those numbers there is sort of as far as like Bugu ratio goes, you'd be, if you're following a sort of
one,
linear
thing there,
at the top end 1 and then 0.8, so at the bottom, so 0.8 to 1. And again, coming back to the comparison to kind of like modern interpretations of IPA, it's definitely higher up there. 0.8 is not crazy, but
it's a sweet spot for me for my
one. To be honest, I'd go for 0.8 as a sort of standard option for sort of pale ales and stuff like that. If I'm not looking to go for the soft, sort of hazy approach to the bitterness, but when you're getting up towards a ratio of 1, that's where you do start to get that more intense kind of slightly more old school approach.
Heartburn.
I think there was a bit of a when we're going back a little bit here to when we were talking about the development of IPAs and stuff, but particularly in the UK sort of scene, there was a bit of a kind of arms race, wasn't there, at one point as far as like bitterness goes, and you had like Brewdog were massively into this for some reason. As like, well, we're going to make the IPAs with the highest possible IBU ratio, and I think that might have maybe accelerated the advance of the hazy IPAs, because people maybe just thought like, what the fuck? That's not really doing it for me anymore. I'd like to keep the enamel on my teeth.
Let's get 1,000 IBUs into this beer.
I mean, they did stuff like Jackhammer that was like okay, and then they would do like double Jackhammer, and now it's like 3,000 IBUs, and it's gonna,
they should have just put 20 grams of fucking Enigma in a dry hop. That's all they needed. Could have saved themselves a fortune.
If only they'd known.
I fully agree with what you're saying, Tricky. I do think that the IBU range is an important characteristic, not just of the American IPA, not of the West Coast IPA, but of the pale ale. Okay, I do think that the Bootagoo, and I think that is one of the more important factors when you're classifying a beer, because it's very difficult to have a hazy, soft, super pillowy beer with 195 IBUs in it. I don't think it's like it's almost you see a style and you go with that style, and we all expect, especially, I mean, I've drank Jaipur, and Jaipur's as bitter as it comes, and fucking Sierra Nevada, as I was saying, the bitterness is what makes it the perfect barbecue beer. I think that Bootagoo 0.8 for me at the absolute outside, 1 if you're crazy, and then there's what's his name, the bloke who did the 200 plus IBU beer, who was talking Bowtie Man. What's his name? Got his own pub, bald head, lives at home, English bloke, bow tie, got his own brewery. Can't remember his name. Peter Hodge.
Peter Hodge, yes.
Peter Hodge, yeah. Top bloke, 200 IBU beer. Pass.
He's not bold though.
I thought he was bald.
He's definitely not bald.
Oh, okay. I must be projecting.
But he does like to brew a lot of the like Victorian style beers from the I forgot the name of the recipe book, but there's like recipe book with all the old Victorian beer recipes in it, and the original kind of IPA recipes in there. The IBUs are crazy because they're putting the hops in there for a different purpose, basically.
Yeah. So you don't die from the shitty water.
And it's going to be aged for long enough for most of that to disappear by the time you actually end up drinking it.
Yeah, I think now's a really good time to jump onto the malt bill as well, because the malt bill, as we've talked about, is essentially pale malt, crystals, and a bit of wheat, and there's very little else in there. As a traditional. As a traditional,
yeah, I was going to say we have to make that distinction, don't we? We have to go old school versus new school versions.
Right,
and
which have got lactose and deer peanuts in them.
Extending on the point of the guidelines for the American IPA, right? That's what you're talking about in terms of the grist, rather than
Sorry, I was muted.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So definitely, like, presence of the crystal malt being probably the key characteristic of that style of beer.
Yeah, they all tend to be quite sweet, and have that kind of residual sweetness, which balances that bitterness quite nicely. But at the same time, then you get the extra sweetness from the alcohol because they're all 47%, and that doesn't quite work too well, in my opinion.
Well, some of the better examples, I think, are great because they get huge amounts of hop aroma, but they balance well.
Yeah.
So they balance that sweetness with the bitterness. Whereas some of the poorer examples are probably either too bitter, or they are too sweet, or they lack the proper hop presence that you'd expect.
I think it's also partly to do with the those original kind of C hop varieties and how they play with. So there's very much your Cascade Centennials and things like that. There's very much more of a kind of, we've talked about the pithy kind of grapefruity type flavors and maybe more of a aggressive bitterness to them. And I think with those, if you add caramel into the mix there, that can play off each other better because you've got like a more of a counterpoint to that flavor. And when we're talking about balance, that's where maybe with those old school style recipes, the really heavy use of those sort of C hops, Columbus as well, another one that we haven't really mentioned there, that maybe plays off against the caramel sweetness a bit better for me than if you were going to put something in there that's quite tropical, juicy kind of flavor, because then you're just adding sweet to sweet rather than do you know what I mean? Like for me, I think maybe some of those basically hops that have been bred more towards the sort of hazy Nipah kind of style of brewing, they just maybe don't work that well in the. So sometimes you do get the more recent interpretations of a West Coast where you try and put it with caramel caramel malts with like tropical flavored hops, and it just becomes a bit of a sweet.
Do you
mess.
think actually there's a point here in that the crystal malts that we have in the UK and the crystal malts that they have in the US are totally different as well? So you could use I don't know, caramel malt, and it's
I mean, I don't know. Can't say I've ever used American crystal malt, so I don't. There's probably a brewlosophy experiment on that. I bet if you look it up, but
because their Turo will be different to what we're using. You'll probably find caramel's more of like a Maris Otter or something that's been crystallized, and it gives that more bready sort of weird bready sort of thing that I just don't think works in a West Coast. Whereas when I've had stuff, I think when it was at Beerhawk used to do the kits, they actually get stuff shipped over from the States, and it was their crystal malts that were kind of that, I don't know, 34 EBC or whatever, the kind of low crystal, but it was super clean, sort of sweet crystal compared to, what we've got. I always struggled with that, I think, because it was like Brewdog recipes and stuff, and I always found mine's always turned out really bready, sickly, caramelly, bready sort of sweetness, and when I'd had kits, the crystal malts were super clean and really, really nice that way. So
yeah, and a lot of those Brewdog recipes, sort of punk IPA aside, but a lot of the other recipes for their original beers were very heavy on the crystal malts, like to the point where it would be heavy even by American standards. So yeah, but I think if you look at sort of recipes for the classic examples of West Coast IPAs, and you'll generally see sort of like a 5-6% kind of light to medium crystal addition at least. So I think, or if not more,
120 EBC. So 60 is it 60 Leverbond, 120 EBC?
60 Leverbond is like Cara 60 seemed to be the one that was kind of quite popular in a lot of beers, but Cara Malt and sort of similar levels as well, but they would maybe use that a bit more heavily, possibly with some extra Cara pills and stuff in there as well. Whereas the more modern interpretations of West Coast IPAs, I think you've seen a lot of people talking about using Munich more so than the caramel malts for various reasons, or just not really going down the caramel malt route at all and keeping it super simple and just sort of, lager malt or something similar, extra pale malt, and maybe a bit of wheat like we've mentioned before, or Cara pills or a very, very light crystal malt. So
Cara Gold
depends what you're after. Cara Gold's one that I think you can get
a 10 to 12 Leverbond sort of Cara Gold.
Caramel's the one that always gives me nuts.
You guys might remember when I made the Firestone Walker Union Jack West Coast IPA clone that was out of the one of the books that I've got, and I'm pretty sure I sent at least a few of you or a load of people a bottle of this, but that's just pale malt Munich 2, which is kind of interesting in terms of just that addition, that extra sweetness that you get out of Munich, dark Munich, and then extra light crystal. So it's a relatively simple malt bill, but I've also tried to clone Pliny the Elder. And I'm pretty sure that has got quite... So that is... that's also quite simple. That's just pale malt, Crystal 40 and dextrin carapils. With some added dextrose, I think, to dry it out.
Yeah, that's another thing, isn't it? I think quite a few of those recipes, they do tend to add a bit of sugar in there just to try and get that dryness as well.
Bump
which is definitely something you don't see very often with more modern recipes. And push the ABV up. Good point.
Quite unique to that kind of style of beer.
So I guess if we were going to give a sort of a template for maybe the more traditional West Coast IPA, it would probably be just sort of as pale a base malt as you can get. You're generally wanting to avoid things like Maris Otter, I think. And then I guess maybe sort of like 6 to 10% of crystal malt, generally sort of low to medium color. You don't want to go too crazy. Munich can sometimes be involved there, and then possibly some sugar as well to dry it out.
That was one of the things that I took from that Siren thing that Craft Beer Channel and Siren did the other day, was when the bloke from Siren was talking about it. Sorry, I just had my microphone too loud there. One of the things that the bloke from Siren was saying was they pretty much use, or was it Matt from Track was saying that they don't really use Maris Otter anymore. They tend to use Pilsner.
Matt said that.
They use Pilsner as their base, and it gives you a slightly more blank canvas.
Oh, maybe it was.
No, the bloke from Siren was saying he used lager malt.
Yeah, they've moved away from that. It was Siren, yeah.
They were saying that they use lager malt, and Matt from Track was saying that they're using Pilsner.
Yeah.
And it just kind of gives you a more blank,
higher nitrogen. He wanted higher nitrogen as well, Chris, for his haziness.
Yeah, true. But I remember him saying that actually. But also the just the lack of that bready nature, that Maris Otter kind of flavour, which nobody seems to want anymore, which is a shame because Maris Otter is a wonderful malt. But if it's not fitting with the style of beer that you're making, then maybe it's time
great in a batter.
It's just a weird clash with that sort of heavy hopped kind of style for me. I agree with him. Don't like it. Yeah, it's not. It's confusing. It muddies the rest.
Does Golden Promise work better for you then?
I've used Golden Promise in that sort of style, and it's worked really well. Yeah, but that's a very much like a light sort of sweet. For me, like if I'm talking really about the difference in that and Maris, like Golden Promise is like a white bread, very light kind of sweet white bread kind of flavor, whereas Maris Otter is more of a kind of bread crust, slightly nutty. Do you know what I mean? Like very subtle difference, but it's enough for me to.
But Maris has got its place in darker beers, I think. It's where if you've got bitters and stuff and you want that sort of maltiness to come through, then that is the malt for it.
Yeah, 100%.
I think the Pilsner adds kind of more of a biscuit, like not biscuity, like
it's crackery
note that's crisper, that's gonna kind of.
Excuse me.
It's actually gonna almost
sweet cracker bread.
Give a less prominent backbone for the hops just to play, isn't it? And I don't want to jump through onto the yeast discussion, but the yeast is doing the same thing, right? It's just it's doing its job and then getting out of the way.
Yeah,
fair play.
And that's pretty much what you want from a base malt as well. Is
just to go over one thing was when we were talking about the Munich was you've got Wehrmann and then you've got Crisp, and it was back to what Jimmy was saying about it was that the Crisp one gives you more of that sort of, was it sweet, sticky, sort of caramelly type thing rather than what the Wehrmann does. The Wehrmann's not quite like that. So I thought that was another good point to pick up.
Wehrmann's much more German, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. Whereas I think
as much as a country can have a taste when it comes to beer styles, Germany definitely has a taste.
Yeah, so if you want to do a German lager, then the Wehrmann's maybe the way to go. Whereas if you're actually thinking, I want a kind of slightly crystallized, malt, but for a Westie, then maybe it is the Crisp one you want to go for instead.
Well, I think Crisp extra pale malt is super popular amongst breweries that tend to make a lot of hazy beers because I think it does add just that little bit more sweetness, but with very little color.
Mm-hmm.
I think some breweries like that have probably got slightly more lined pockets might push their use of Golden Promise, but I think Crisp extra pale or just pale malt is reasonably well priced.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I'm pretty sure that when we were in the brewery, we used Golden Promise, and it was only about £1.40 a sack more than Maris Otter.
Yeah.
Well, how many sacks you putting in?
Well, it depends on your scale size, right? In terms of
25
stuff, but
2.5x. So,
so it could be £18 a bag versus 20.
It's like 15 heck and whatever. Then that adds up,
yeah,
it's only £30.
No, but you think percentages of malt cost? It could be.
It's only £30. This is what I don't understand. You're scrimping and say, it's like when I build a computer, okay, there's components within there that I will never save money on. I will always buy the best that I can, and always buy the most expensive that I can because it's always the best. And that's power supply and motherboard. Now, to
But
me,
it's diminishing returns as well, Chris, and then the brewery might not see those returns for the extra
may
cost.
be diminishing returns, but the point is they can still cover that within the output of their beer.
But then if it's competitive and they're selling casks against other breweries, then it might not be.
And this is why Ferrari make fucking millions and billions a year and Skoda don't. So, you know.
Very different markets, though, to be fair.
Not really. It's the same principle. It's a premium product versus a basic product.
Yeah, and there's a market for that now, I would say. But back maybe...
Oh, absolutely. Years ago, absolutely. But it's my point still stands.
But yeah, Golden Promise isn't like, oh, it's so much better than Crisp Extra Pale, because you might not be wanting that extra sweetness that the Golden Promise brings. It might be for showcasing the hops. I'm sure these breweries, if Golden Promise was the better malt for showcasing it, that they would go for that.
Yeah,
I think it's also like you
doesn't add that much.
I
like
was
we were
simply
saying,
asking if Tricky had used Golden Promise. I wasn't advocating for Golden Promise.
I've used it in those times, but I think, like we were saying at the beginning, it's more about stuff getting out of the way, really, than adding something to it. So maybe, you know, it's more important not to have something that's got lots of flavour than a Golden Promise versus an extra pale or a lager malt. There's probably not that much in it between those, to be honest.
Well, lager malt is pretty much the cheapest you can get, isn't it? It's like
yeah.
If you go for like the basic stuff, then you're laughing.
Right. At that point, I'm calling a fucking halt to this, and I'm saying it is time for the commercial break before we hit the hops.
Dear.
So, commercial break time.
Yeah, let's go.
Owen's got his cracked. Andy's just finished his.
I'd already drank this one, so this isn't going to be my commercial beer, but this was a Siren and Wild Beer Company collab, Cryo the Coast. And it was all right, but I think it's made me think about what Robbie was saying about cryo hops and maybe not having that full flavor profile from some of the vegetal matter being in them, because I don't know if this was exclusively cryo hops in it or whatever, but it felt like there was something missing out of the hop flavor. It was like nice, but I don't know. Has anyone experienced that with sort of all cryo hopped beers?
Yeah, no, I think you're bang on there, Tricky. I think actually when you do see a lot of beers that use cryo, they're tending to also use it with classic like BBC or T90 hops, because I think when you just go pure cryo, it just misses something. It misses like the kind of earthy notes that just help to like lift up the top notes,
like,
you know,
just fill it out. I mean, to make a sort of a musical kind of comparison, it's almost like somebody sort of EQ'd out the mid range in the flavor profile. Weird, but that was sort of what it made me think of when I tasted it. So hopefully this next Siren beer will be better, because I've got another West Coast style beer from them, which is their California IPA.
And that's an interesting style in itself, isn't it? One thing we probably haven't talked much about is this new cold IPA style that's come along, which I did a little bit of reading on, but probably need to do more research before we chat about it.
That's very much confused me in terms of the difference between that and IPLs.
Somebody just give me a quick overview, like a 2-sentence overview. What the fuck is a cold IPA?
It's another episode, mate.
I think from what I understand, which may not be right, is a cold IPA is pretty much what you classify as an IPL.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Right. It's what effectively your nipple, pretty much. So it's either using a lager yeast or using an ale yeast and fermenting it really low, but using quite a lot of hops.
Mm-hmm. That's what I understood as well.
Yeah.
So what you're saying is I started the cold IPA trend.
I think you can try and claim that. Yeah.
Almost
just
certainly.
Claimed it. It's fucking mine.
Trendsetter.
Well, you could actually your Kvike beers are probably all cold IPAs.
There we go. Cold IPA. Sold.
There you go.
Who's going first anyway?
Well, I don't mind going up first. So as I mentioned earlier, I'm drinking this Siren Time Hops beer, which is the homage to Focal Banger from The Alchemist. So this is a Citra mosaic beer brewed by Siren.
Did you get a double pack of those then? Because you didn't drink the other one the other night.
I got the single pack that came with the glass, and then but I also got another. I think it was the Simcoe and the Citra Mosaic, so I got kind of 2 of those beers.
You've made a good choice there.
Thank you. Yeah, I figured as much. But and I also got like the 3-bottle barrel aged little pack that.
Okay.
There was some nice looking. Those really cool little stout bottles that they do.
Mm-hmm.
So on the nose, I mean, this is a reasonably kind of darkish beer for a big hazy 7%, effectively kind of double IPA. It's quite kind of a sort of deep orange color, but huge hop aroma on the nose, and it's just a real proper dank, sticky, like overripe mango, papaya. Yeah, it's all those things that everyone's drunk a Citra Mosaic beer, right? We all know that kind of vibe.
Yeah,
such a great pairing. It's amazing, but this is just smells incredible. So I'm going to dive in. So what I think is different about this beer to what we're probably used to is the level of bitterness in the beer. So typically, like what you might be expecting from a hazy 7% IPA with Citra Mosaic would be it's much sweeter, that accentuating that kind of the hop flavor in it being juicier, and this actually is much more balanced. There's a much higher level of IBUs in this. I think it might be upwards of sort of 70 or 80 IBUs, but it's incredibly good, very, very nice. And by all accounts, when I was listening along to the live podcast from Siren and the Craft Beer Channel, a lot of them that had drunk Focal Banger from The Alchemist were saying that of all of the time hop beers that Siren had done, that this was probably the closest one to the actual original beer, like the Focal Banger. So kind of excited to be able to drink this beer and go, okay, well, maybe that's what Focal Banger sort of tastes like, and getting probably as close as I might ever do to drinking The Alchemist Focal Banger. So really nice, very good. But
sounds like a good one, mate.
Yeah, I'm pretty excited. I'm going to enjoy this, but definitely more bitter than I was expecting.
Fair enough.
Whilst
the other two are checking their phones,
I'm not going to.
I'm just taking. I'm trying to do notes just now. I'm trying to decipher because my beer's a bit straight. It's like a total. You'll love this one, Chris, but it is like it's not. It's yeah. It's a bit.
Well, I have to say, I'm loving the one that I'm drinking. I bought a few cans of this when I did my order because I'd heard very good things about it. But my beer is Island in the Sun West Coast IPA by Polly's.
Nice.
Okay. Now, I have said many times I'm not a fan of the West Coast style. I'm not a fan of the super bitter beers. But this beer, right, I can only describe to you what I've done. But please bear with me, okay? So when I poured it, I was left with a good centimetre and a half of head on the top. And there were a few bubbles that were annoying me. They weren't symmetrical. They were a bit out of place. So I just popped them with my finger. And then because I'm a tight Yorkshire bastard, I literally gave my finger a lick, and all I tasted was straight up pine and resin. Okay, and it was beautiful because it was in the perfect balance. It was perfectly balanced for what it was. And I've got to be honest, I've had a few beers tonight, so I'm a little bit pissed because I felt let down by the fact that you guys had all of the dippers the other day, so I've been hitting them hard tonight. This beer is probably one of the finest West Coast IPAs I have had. Sorry, West Coast Pales that I've had in a very long time. There is an almost perfect balance between the dank, piney resin nature and what can only be described as literal straight up apricots. It's like I've pulled one off of a tree and I'm eating an apricot, but it's got this piney resinous nature that's kind of rolling round on the back of my tongue. It's got a really good hint of bitterness. I reckon it's sitting about 40, 42 IBUs. It's right at the bottom end of the scale, but it's there. It's enough for me to notice. There's a little residual sweetness. As you can see from the colour, there's a fair bit of something in there, whether it's Munich or whether it's, whether it's crystal or whatever it is. This beer literally flicks my bean very, very well. It's a great beer. It is not in your face. It's very, very drinkable. It is fruity whilst at the same time having that classic West Coast kind of dankness and pininess and resinous nature. This is one of the nicest pale ales, West Coast, East Coast, or whatever you want to call it. It's probably one of the finest West Coast pale ales I have had for a very long time. It's really nice and it's hitting straight down the mark for me. Absolutely love it. Shout out to Polly's Brewery. If you've not put an order in with Polly's, put an order in with Polly's and get yourself some of this beer because this is really, really nice.
That and Wylam.
Nice beer.
You've been really enjoying the Polly's beer, haven't you, Chris?
I'm going to say it right here, right now, because Matt's not on the podcast, right? But I think Polly's are banging it out apart better than Track are right now.
Oh, come on. Their track beers were insane.
They were good.
I mean,
they were very, very, very good.
There's a lot of very, very good breweries way up there just producing some incredible beer. We shouldn't compare.
Are you eating jerky right now?
Yeah, I'm eating. It's not jerky.
Fucking hate you right now.
It's what's the other one? Biltong. It's biltong.
Oh fuck you, right. Cunt. I might have to order a fucking kebab now.
Shall I do my one then? So
this is good. This is a great beer.
For it up, but that is the next Siren beer, Huntington, California IPA, 6.2%. A light, crisp IPA with refreshing, zesty citrus notes. We use incredible Citra, Cascade, and Mosaic hops for fresh, piney aromas and heaps of tropical fruit flavors. Finishes with a moorish, resinous bitterness, inviting you into the next sip. So you've got your classic hop there with the Cascade, as far as what we've been talking about for the more old school, but then maybe a little bit more of the new school with your Citra Mosaic. In the glass, it's not totally clear, but it's definitely not sort of super murky, so a little bit of haze on it. Color's very light, and it definitely smells more like old school West Coast than it does kind of the sort of juicy Nipah type stuff that Owen was talking about a minute ago with his beer. Quite grapefruity and a little bit of pine. It's dry. It does have the bitterness there. It's maybe not full on bitterness. So it's sort of, I would guess that's maybe not at the top range of the sort of bitterness level that we were talking about, or the Bugu ratio, but it's definitely enough to be recognizing it more as a West Coast than, like I said, the newer, softer sort of versions of IPAs. I do get quite a bit of the Cascade kind of flavour there, but the Citra and the Mosaic is kind of filling it out. I think actually adding a hop light Cascade to the sort of classic Citra Mosaic combination is a really good way to get you more towards that slightly more piney or resinous kind of flavour profile that you might want for a more old school West Coast. And that's just really nice, to be honest. That's a really good, really good example of a West Coast IPA for me. So
I think that sort of
nice.
style tricky is kind of almost like zones in on drinkability, isn't it? It's sort of the California
Definitely.
IPA is a lot about balance. It's a lot about trying to nail that drinkability aspect.
And you can tell when you're drinking a beer like this, like I could easily go on to another can of that straight away and drink it quite fast. Whereas if it was like a 6.2% NEPA, you'd probably, even if you're really enjoying it, be sort of thinking, oh, I don't know if I can, go straight in for another one of those afterwards. So yeah, drinkability is a massive factor, I think. And the dryness and that, maybe that's higher bitterness, I think is the big difference for me there, as far as
you can't smash chewy beers, can you?
No, you cannot. And it's weird though, because drinkability is a strange one in terms of a session beer. It's all a time and place thing, isn't it? Because for me, like when I'm drinking at home, I probably want beers that are more prominent in the sense of being a bit more defined in their style, edgy and different. And, and especially as a homebrew, you kind of want to be like really testing the boundaries, don't you, in terms of like what's new, what's supposed to be great, what's different. And actually, I'd probably end up avoiding ordering beers that are just really enjoyable and drinkable. You know what I mean?
I know what you mean. Yeah, 100%. It's almost like you're looking for an almost more challenging drink, aren't you? Sometimes.
Exactly. Yeah. I'm looking for a more challenging drink.
I'm willing to sit there and pontificate on it for 45 minutes to an hour, rather than like I'm not got the goal of slamming it in like 20 minutes and moving on to the next one straight away. So.
No, but then weirdly, right, is my home brewing predominantly then probably satisfies that bit in the middle, which is then the drinkability. Because you've got to drink 20 litres of it.
Yeah, exactly.
So then that becomes the kind of
otherwise it sits in keg for about 9 months. One of the ones.
Which is quite weird. I've not really thought about it that way, but
yeah.
There you go.
Cool. Shall I go on mine? Mine just left field, and it is. So the actual glass today matches up STFs, Simple Things Fermentations. It's a elderflower wit, right? And it's 6.2%.
It's a fucking West Coast episode.
Fuck the Westies.
Really. Thank you, Chris.
Fuck. Even I've got a Westie.
And I was drinking a Westie just before, which I necked.
Oh, fuck's sake. Hang on a second.
I had a Sierra before.
I mean, I went for a big, like, hazy IPA, but it is 80 IBUs, so you could really...
Double IPA.
It's fitting in there, you know.
I am so tempted to just mute Andy and move on.
Whatever.
Bro, go on. Give us
Come on then. Let us know what you think of your wit.
Yeah, so the elderflower wit is so delicate. It's unreal. Like a kind of real sort of lemon on the nose. Really light and floral. Really inviting. Unlike a fucking West Coast IPA. But
the antithesis. Andy's providing the compare and contrast.
Yeah, exactly.
Of being the antithesis of the West Coast IPA.
Mm. The elderflower is very, very interesting. It's quite florally. I don't know if the hops in this, or maybe it's like Equinaut or something, but it's got that green pepper that I normally get with that, and the just floral delicateness. and I think the main flavour you get in your tongue's like a pear. It's like this kind of weird pear from it, and lychee as well. It's like pear lychee sort of combo, and just get this nice malt, just a nice kind of sweet maltiness to it as well. I think because it's the 6.2, it's got a bit of malt character coming through. You can see the colour; it's quite amberish, or well, quite golden then anyway. So, well, golden. I don't know, orangey, slight colour, but yeah, absolutely. It's a beautiful little delicate beer, and I think that's STF, Simple Things Fermentations. The head brewer or the guy that owns it, Phil Saison, his whole ethos is not to do what everyone else is doing, but go for more classic styles and bring them up to today. To kind of showcase them as such. So I don't think Phil would be doing a West Coast IPA, if you know what I mean. So there you go. Total left field.
Thanks, Andy.
No bother.
Yeah, has it got any bitterness?
Yes, it's got a good dunt. Yeah, I would say it's it's probably a 0.8 booger sort of thing. It's got like a nice kind of crunch and bitterness on it.
There you go.
Yep, which balances it up. So yeah. I did see my beer before that I necked. That was a Sierra Nevada. Which is more fitting for the actual episode, but you know.
It might have been. Yeah.
But it was homebrewed. It was my homebrewed Sierra Nevada.
It was a swing and a miss. But
yeah.
Never mind.
But who cares?
Tell us about your Sierra Nevada clone then. Come on.
Oh, come on. So it was the one I changed up for Munich malt instead of Crystal, and it worked really well. It's got real good grapefruit cup character, and you know it's got that bitterness, because I think I went from, what was the first one? The Conflux I had first, and that, you know, going from that to then the Sierra was just the crunch and bitterness just makes you let it go in. And like drinkability, okay, I as you seen, I was quite happy just to throw that one back and tan it, because it's tannable. So yeah,
I'm kind of tempted to. I want to brew another West Coast IPA. I'll tell you what, that Union Jack Westie I brewed was really good. It was really good. I'll be tempted to rebrew that, but it was I think it was 7%. So I need to sort of think about scaling that back, really. And really, what I think I want is what Chris just drank, which was the kind of West Coast Pale.
Mm-hmm.
Because then you kind of hitting that middle of the road of like sessionable beer.
Even if you try and hit the 5.5, and if you hit the 5.5, that's more tolerable at the the 19-litre keg sort of session.
Well, if we end up getting polys on, I mean, we can always tap them up for the recipe for this.
Boom, all over it.
Yeah, I mean, there's been so many great beers released recently, and to be fair, it's not like we're shy from when it comes to. Well, I'm tight, but we're not shy from buying these beers that are coming out, these new beers and stuff. I think it's something that we need to look at as far as
recipe development.
Yeah, recipe development for us as brewers, rather than I joke about specifically tapping up breweries, but if we can get some highlights, some punchlines from some of their recipes, or we did this and it was slightly different, it helps all of us as brewers to deliver in our own brews and to expand our knowledge and our kind of understanding of everything as we go forward.
Cool.
So, shall we move back on now? Shall we get on to the hops? Because we've kind of half covered them. And then some bastard, one of you three, has put down that my favourite hop is Simcoe.
Oh, yeah, that was me.
Yeah, it is, isn't it? What?
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah,
totally. Chris needs to embrace him.
Yeah.
Chris, if you went back to Simcoe recent, I'm sure you've had Simcoe beers recently and you've actually really enjoyed them.
I have had a couple of Simcoe beers recently. And I have also had a package from a certain gentleman who works for a company. I can't remember the name.
YCH?
Yeah, it might be YCH. And he specifically sent me 2 packs of Cryo Simcoe,
Oh, amazing.
which are going to go into a beer that I'm going to produce in a month or so.
Well done, Chris.
And it's literally, I'm just going to dry hop with
He's
Simcoe.
facing his fears.
What can I say? I'm a boneheaded idiot who likes to have pop. So I'm going to produce a Simcoe Mosaic beer, which is going to have Mosaic from about 10 minutes. 10 minutes, 5 minutes, Whirlpool Mosaic, and then Simcoe in the dry hop.
Yeah, good shout.
But it's going to be Cryo Simcoe in the dry hop. 2 packs of Cryo.
So is that
Simcoe.
50? That'll be 50 grams. I think they're
They're
cryos
25, yeah.
25s.
So that's
that'd be
equivalent
100.
about 100 and 120
Dry hopping
gram.
of 100 of normal.
100.
Yeah, about
Well,
one.
but Chris, based on what Tricky and I were just talking about in terms of the sort of lack of vegetable matter and that adding a certain aspect to the flavour, are you thinking about also adding some just classic T90 hops? And
well, I was
sort of thing in the dry hop?
considering. I was
As an
considering
experiment.
going Simcoe Mosaic Citra and throwing in like 50 grams of Citra into the dry hop as well.
I think that's a good shout.
I've not made up my mind. I'll be honest with you. I've not made up my mind.
Yeah, you're sitting.
Simcoe and Mosaic is definitely a good shout because they kind of amp each other up because it's like Mosaic.
Are they not the daughter?
Mosaic's like a descendant of Simcoe, I think, and something else.
Well, that's cool because my daughter winds me up, so it's similar thing.
If you want to go a little bit more classic pairing, Simcoe and Amarillo is always a good one as well. Like
I'm out of Amarillo.
That's in loads of really good like commercial beer recipes. I think Simcoe Amarillo.
I don't produce good beer, so
I've got a Simcoe.
In that case,
I've got
Magnum.
a Simcoe.
I've got a kilo of that.
Kilo dry hop and Magnum. What could possibly go wrong?
Yeah.
No, wait, is it Simcoe? No, the IPL I did was Citra, Simcoe, and Amarillo. Yeah,
I love Simcoe.
I'm simply thinking about going down the Mosaic and Simcoe route and after what we've just talked about with basically the Citra in there is purely because I want to get to something which is fruity, a little bit of dankness. I'm going to go with a very clean sort of Pilsner base. I'm going to put some crystal in there as well. Essentially, I'm going to produce my version of a Westie, but I'm going to produce my version of a Westie where the IBUs stop at around about 35.
Chris, why don't you just go for Munich then?
That's fair.
Well, I wanted to go more old school.
But it's going to be honking. It'll be that crystal, you'll know.
I don't speak Scottish. You're going to have to explain what honking means. Because all I'm thinking about is tits right now.
It's just rubbish.
Tits.
I think I'm going to go with the crystal route because I can. And because,
I know you want to keep the IBUs in check, but one thing I would say with the West Coast IPAs, like a lot of us obviously use software that now interprets the like Whirlpool hops as adding bitterness and all of that. I think for like West Coast IPAs, you're probably better off just ignoring that and just sticking with the like IBUs you're getting from the boil hops. For me,
I'm going
because I've found that if you're actually taking that into account, you quite often end up with it falling a bit short of where you want the bitterness.
Yeah, I'd agree with that.
Right.
Do you know what I mean? Like it's because you might get some sort of bitterness, but it's generally, for me, it's not really hitting.
Yeah, it's not the same bitterness. It's different in the tongue and all that.
Well, and my mind went to, well, if you just kind of try and hit the boogoo, but to your point, Tricky is try and ignore the bitterness that you get from the Whirlpool. But I think when you start adding crystal malt, there is also a level of perceived sweetness that maybe doesn't also come through in that boogoo calculation. Mm-hmm. So you actually can end up with a double count when you use crystal malt. It becomes more sweet, and then the Whirlpool doesn't quite add enough bitterness, and then you end up with just a cloyingly sweet beer.
Yeah,
gentlemen, I'm throwing 18 grams of Magnum in at 60 minutes to give me roughly 28 IBUs.
Nah, you'll
Yes,
be all right then.
perfect.
That's already on the list. I've just pulled the recipe up right now.
Perfect.
I have thought about all this, and I don't go for a shit without researching it first. You know what I mean? So I'm right there in where I'm aiming for. I want to do justice to the Simcoe, given its cryo and it's come directly from YCH. But at the same time, I want a beer that I can drink. So I figured somewhere around about 35 IBUs, taking into account the sweetness, taking into account I'm going to be using pops or Pilsner for the base. I've not decided which yet. That's basically where I want to go. But the downside for me, or not the downside, the confusing part, the part I've not fully researched out yet, is whether or not to add the Citra.
I wouldn't.
I'm up and down with the Citra. I don't know whether to throw 50 grams of Citra into the dry hop.
I would want the Simcoe.
My vote is I'm in favour.
I'm not. I think you'll end up with a Citra Mosaic beer. And what you maybe want to do is actually say, what does Cryo Simcoe do?
With 2 packs of Cryo Simcoe, I'm going to end up with a Citra Mosaic beer.
It's the danger of that. That's all I'm saying.
What are you saying? Reduce it to 25?
I would just get rid of the Citra and then go.
Nah, I can't get rid of the Citra.
No.
I can't because I need, like we've just talked about it, the lack of vegetal matter in the dry hop. I need something in there.
You got any
What
cascade?
is
It depends. It depends how much.
Only about 1.5 kilos.
More mosaic in the dry
What you're going to get from the
cascade in there.
mosaic. It depends what you're going to get from the mosaic as a result of adding that in terms of the late additions and the whirlpool. That might give you enough of that kind of vegetal vibe.
Well,
I think, to be honest,
Thomas
Chris,
has just given us an option, which is a smaller amount of mosaic and then some Citra.
Yeah. No Citra. I just, for me, it would be about learning what the Cryo Simcoe brings.
yeah, we I think we're all on that same page, Andy. But equally, it's about punting to get the best possible beer, isn't it? And I think you're still going to learn about what Cryo Simcoe brings, but you're hoping that the first version would be improved by adding a little bit of classic T90 hop in with it to make sure that it doesn't just become a little bit flat.
Well, I as much as I love the input from you guys, and I am taking it all on board.
Hey, Chris, you do what you want.
No. The Swedish chef, Thomas himself, has just said the mosaic will enhance the Citra. So maybe dropping the Citra down from 50 grams in the dry hop to maybe 25, leaving the Cryo Simcoe in there. You see, gentlemen, for those of you who are listening to the podcast for the first time, this is essentially how a recipe development session with the Hop Edition goes. Yeah. Everybody tells me I'm wrong, and then there's lots of cooks trying to ruin the broth. But the bottom line is, I respect you three. I've had nothing but good advice from you three. So as far as I'm concerned, we are going to produce a masterpiece of fine dining.
But the thing is, right, you're gonna think about this whilst you're on the toilet tomorrow, and then maybe when you get into bed, and then you're going to think about it for another 2 days, and then you're going to make your decision before you.
And then he's going to rewrite the recipe completely and ignore everything.
And it's going to become an IPL.
He'll rewrite the recipe the day before he brews it, and then he'll completely change his mind when he actually comes to brew it.
There won't be any Simcoe in it.
There won't be any Simcoe in it at all.
We're such a mistake.
And then that moment, like 2 minutes before he throws in the dry hop, he decides to do something else.
Yeah.
No, that's not a reflection of you, Chris. That was me.
That's
that was
me. I would do exactly the same.
I'll be honest with you.
I'm going with the Magnum.
That was a satirical comment on the observation of my own brewing.
Owen, that's exactly what I do.
Yeah, do the same.
It's funny stuff.
The bottom line is we've got some fantastic hops. YCH are producing some absolutely awesome stuff.
Cryo.
And I think for me to properly utilize this Simcoe, I do have to sit down and properly plan this beer. And taking information from you guys and from Thomas and from anybody else who wants to give it, I'm more than happy to entertain all ideas.
Did
But
you
the final
see?
decision is probably Oscar's, not mine.
Did you see the one I got from YCH at the beer festival? And it was like literally, it just screams West Coast because it was a Tannum,
You had all the three
Cryo,
hops.
Columbus, Cascade, Simcoe, and Chinook. It was just like, hello, Westie.
If that ain't West Coast, I don't know what is.
That's got West Coast written on it. It's just like,
just go
now how
easy,
do you-
Andy. Go easy.
and the Chinooks that, mate, have previous on the Pale Fire with the Chinooks, so.
No dry hop, man. No dry hop.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah,
that's
just go
To be
very
fair, I'd
lightly
be like
handed,
Columbus and the
lightly-handed.
Chinook, get that like in the. Is
Do you
that
reckon?
your? Is
That's
that your
the
mate with the car? Yeah.
5 litre Mustang.
Anyway,
Chris now lives next to
as
a
I
drag
said,
strip.
I'd keep that Columbus and the Chinook like earlier.
Columbus
earlier
is
and
going
then
in. That'll be the
everything else
earlier
a bit
bit
later
then.
on.
Yeah.
Can I just say this Citra Mosaic time hop beer was incredibly drinkable for a 7% beer. It just I literally just finished it a minute ago and went, what? I don't even really remember drinking that beer.
To be honest, like that,
so quickly.
we've gone like the recipe sort of thing for hazy IPAs has gone so far towards the like keeping the bitterness as low as possible that beer has completely like changed my feelings about how I would want to brew that style next, to the point where I'd be like, actually, let's go for some, decent whack of bitterness in there. Still scared of it because it's like, that could be a quick route to completely ruining it. But
I think if you were to do that, you would taste it the first couple of sips and you'd go, "Oh, I've totally screwed that."
Yeah.
But then it's not until you start sitting down and actually drinking it, then you kind of almost see the value.
Mm-hmm.
Like as you're drinking it, you don't sort of realize that it becomes way more drinkable than a like a double IPA that is basically. But
then maybe like when we
strength.
sort of have a NEPA or a hazy that's like too bitter, or we perceive as too bitter, that's sometimes where the late hopping or the dry hopping has fucked up in some way and it's added too much bitterness, which is a different thing to maybe having that baseline IBUs from a little 60-minute edition or something like that. That's.
I'm not sure what Andy's trying to convey in his
the Altogether IPA.
Strange scribblings.
Remember the Altogether IPA
yeah.
we did? Yeah, that's what it is. It's like 29 grams of Magnum. Boom, big bitter.
Yeah, no, that had a 60-minute edition, didn't it? Like
and then it's got Mosaic and Cascade in the Whirlpool.
But that seems to be like the American approach to NEPA seems to be quite different to what is happening.
It is.
And then dry hop, Cascade, Citra, Mosaic, Simcoe. That was a banger. That was a really good beer.
It's an interesting observation, actually, that we've really only landed on fairly recently. That American NEPAs are very different to what UK NEPAs are, and I'm not sure who kind of made this point actually. Too long ago, someone gave us that perspective.
Is the Alchemist not meant to be like it's got high bitterness?
It is, yeah. I mean, like Focal Banger and Heady Topper are supposed to be like way up there with like 80, 90, 100 IBUs. And I will tell you, like, I could smash a good few cans of this Citra Mosaic beer without even noticing it. And I would notice it because I'd probably be on my ass after 3 of them because it's 7%. But yeah, I'll be dead, and I'll be in my bed. But that it does add in it. And actually, I do think that when you drink some of these kind of super hoppy, very sweet, they're not cloying, but you do get to the end of them and you go, oh, that's been quite hard work. They're very chewy, very kind of, they do lack balance as much as they're almost indulgent. They're almost like an imperial stout. An imperial stout very often, particularly they're leaning towards more dessert style imperial stouts. They're very indulgent.
Because it's like when you get a super rich dessert and it's like the first spoonful, it's like, oh, fuck me, that's amazing. And then by the third spoonful, you're like, I can't take this anymore. There's too much of it. I'm having
I
a
would-
sugar high. Or yeah.
I would point out right now that the only one that actually doesn't do that is creme brulee.
No, I disagree with that. That is...
No, you're totally wrong because I can eat fucking pound upon pound of creme brulee.
Well, yeah,
that's
Chris,
you have
Chris,
done.
you can eat pound upon
That's
pound of
creamy.
almost anything, but you know,
Creme brulee is quite creamy though. It's nice and
it's
light.
heavy.
lovely.
That is heavy.
Creme brulee is the Nipah of desserts.
Yes, it is. It's
No,
like
it's
it's
like-
like
it's
it's like the
custard.
it's the
pretty
Timmy
like,
Jenkins. It's the Timmy Jenkins of desserts, right there.
It's
Yeah,
fantastic.
pretty
Nice feels.
solid, isn't it?
Okay. I'm just going to talk through the hops quite quickly because
Yeah.
I need to get this back on track. Okay. We've got like 3/4 of the podcast still to do. American hops are generally used in a Westie.
Right. I'm gonna go for a piss while you do that.
Oh, cheers, mate.
Sorry, I'll keep you company, mate.
That's fine. You know, if you want to go for a piss, you crack on. The classic American hops: Citra, Columbus, Topaz, Zeus, CTZ, Cascade. Essentially anything that begins with a C: Comet, Calypso, whatever you want to use. You know, Chinook.
Mhm.
But more recently, with the resurgence, Centennial, definitely Centennial. Centennial is like the key, as far as I'm concerned, to a decent Westie. But more recently, the resurgence of almost all of these citrusy, dank, fruity hops are definitely
Amarillo.
used. And lots and lots and lots and lots and lots of them. Okay, so
Yeah.
whilst we focused to this point on the malt bill, the sweetness, the caramel malts, all the other bits and bobs, once you get to the hops, basically anything which is super, super, super fruity and super dank and piney and resinous. And obviously, the breweries are going to find a balance within that. But anything that begins with a C, most things that are Australian or New Zealand, the New World hops, anything which is super fruity, they tend to get thrown into these Westies, okay? And the Westie, as we know it, has shifted from what it originally was, which was an American IPA. Amarillo works particularly well. Simcoe is a banger. It's a banger. Okay, I'm going to give it.
Jimmy says that was his favourite hop.
Do you know, I stood with Jimmy and I forget his name all the time. The dude from YCH, what was his name? Robbie Harrigan, legend, love the bloke, right? But I stood with those two, and Robbie turned round to Jimmy and said, "Chris doesn't like Simcoe," and I was told his exact words were, "Get out my fucking brewery."
He did. I was there. I remember seeing that,
and I'm like, "Well, that's a bit harsh."
It was hilarious.
I'm willing to give Simcoe a shot. I've given it a shot over the last couple of beers that I've had. You know, I've gone down the Simcoe route. I've found that the cat piss, specifically in the 2020 and 2021, has been reduced. I really don't like that sulfury cat piss kind of flavour. But Simcoe's really good in a Westie. Amarillo. I found personally from some of the Westies that I've drank that have actually had the hops listed on them, I find that a Zaka works really well in a Westie. You can disagree. My personal taste buds, fuck you. I found that a Zaka works really well. I've also found, weirdly, that Nelson.
Oh,
well, this
conversation's
got aggressive. My opinion, fuck you.
I'm getting fucking told off by the fucking Icelander.
Here.
And I think there's a lot of hops within the range of the American, New Zealand, New World fruity hops that can be used within a Westie. And almost all of the breweries tend to agree with me. So, hops, anything you want, as long as something begins with C. and more importantly, anything that's citrusy, dank, fruity, resinous, piney, that kind of area is going to be bang on.
You begin with a C.
What?
Come on.
I mean, I'm not playing anymore, and fuck you boys and take it.
It's just your name.
I'm taking it. I don't know.
Totally unprovoked.
Why'd you always read abuse into it? That was just him saying name's Chris.
Yeah, Chris. Not that was not where I was going.
Not Colombo.
Just one more thing.
Can I just say I'm enjoying some beer Baron. Has anyone come across Baron as a brewery? He's muted himself, which is
I
fine.
know.
I'm drinking a beer, which I think Tricky would appreciate.
Oh, and
Oh,
read,
wow.
read the comments on the live stream, because somebody's just
What?
posted this
What's the
comment.
one
I don't know who it
Who
was.
train?
Oh, no, I can't see anything.
Oh, top chat.
Only Thomas talking about Mosaic.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, if you look on the actual live stream, there's a big thing at the bottom. I don't know who wrote that.
No, I missed that. There's a
Yeah.
beer called Dude Train.
Going as a.
Oh, as a cunt. Yeah, very good.
Dude.
Witty.
I was just saying, C for
Chris,
Chris, you know.
YouTube will start banning us.
It will, yeah. Yeah, I'm drinking Dude Train, which is a 5.8% pale ale.
Still not a
Big.
West Coast then.
Easy sipper.
Not an IPA?
Apparently an easy sipper with Amarillo and Enigma. But what I like about the Baron beers is that they've included this bit called nerdy bits, where they actually then break down some cool bits about how they've made the beer, which is
We got to
awesome
get this bloke on a podcast, mate.
for homebrewers. It's funny you should say
Funny
that,
that.
actually, Chris. Yeah. So the nerdy bits, it says a dextrin heavy wort mashed cooler than normal to leave the final body semi-dry. First wort hopping with Centennial, some Citra Idaho 7, also in hot side. So it's kind of like if you were to go to then clone the beer, that's given you a pretty strong basis for how you're gonna then, clone a beer. Whereas like I've found American beers, if you ever sort of get a can of American beer or like American craft IPA or whatever, it's got nothing. It doesn't say. It barely says like that it contains barley. You know what I mean? It's sort of like it just says beer. Do not drink if you're pregnant or
And then
using
is the
heavy
artwork.
machinery. And then just loads of artwork. Yeah. Whereas this
Yeah.
is really cool. It's nice to sort of see that bit. So Jack from Baron Brewing.
Legend.
See you soon.
Nice glass, Chris.
Cheers, mate. What about the beer that's in it? That's a perfect West Coast colour, that.
That is nice.
Is that your Kolsch?
It's Pilsner Urquell.
Oh, brilliant.
I'll tell you what, after all this chat of like hazy versus West Coast and all the rest of it, I went and got myself a track IPA, and obviously like bang on about them all the time, and it's one of their Fraction series. And I've drunk all the other cans of this before, and it's really good. But drinking like 3 West Coast IPAs before this has totally ruined it for me.
You're searching for that bitterness.
I'm just like, where's the bitterness? There's nothing to this. What's going on?
Floppy in your mouth.
But this is the wonderful part about it.
You want
isn't it?
something hard?
This is the best bit about having these kinds of podcasts is we tend to stick to a specific beer style, and we get to the end of it, and then somebody goes off piste and tries to run a black route, and all of a sudden it's like, well, no, this ain't no good. This don't work.
But it's like context, isn't it? Like,
yeah,
I would have drunk that first. I would have been raving about how good it was, and now after 3 West Coast, I'm like, it's just all like pillowy nothingness. Where's the bitterness to make me want to drink more?
Yeah. It's like Mr. Soft. Do you remember those adverts?
Mr. Softy.
Yeah.
And the man who takes a shit and it looks really weird doing it. Anyway.
No, I don't think that was the same advert.
Different.
Yeah, I'm with you. I'm with you, mate. So anyway, in the world's longest pause between me announcing something and actually doing it, the standard water profile that's listed on Brewfather for a West Coast IPA would be 110 calcium, 15 magnesium, 16 sodium, so low salt, 30 chloride, 275 sulfate.
Did you just say it's not 50 chloride?
Wow.
Yeah, that's what I just said, 50.
Oh, I thought you said 30.
No, 50 chloride, 275 sulfate, and then 30 bicarb.
That's quite high sulfate, isn't it?
That's a lot of sulfate.
That's like the Burtonized approach to IPA brewing, isn't it? And I mean,
that's the profile directly from Brewfather, though.
Yeah, I'll go for a high sulfate ratio, but
180.
that's like
I think it
5
goes as high as
to 1.
180.
That's pretty extreme. Yeah, 200 is about my
I think
like
that's
max.
5.5 to
that's
1's
going
a
to be
bit much.
rasping. That's going to be raspingly.
You'd be able to taste that. I reckon you'd be like, oh, there's salts in this. You know,
Is that because there'd be a powdery layer at the bottom of your pint glass? No, I think that's a bit much. I would probably, with the Westie that I've got planned, which is in Brewfather at the moment, I've gone 165 sulfate to 78 chloride.
It's 3 to 1, really, roughly, kind of.
I think I've got about 2.5 to 1.
You'd be looking like Scarface after a sip of that.
What, like this?
But
Looking
just
like
have-
a dog's
just have
arsehole.
powder all over your face.
I mean,
I
that's
think I'd be all right.
it's not
That's
an
okay.
uncommon thing, that, to be fair. No, I get that. And, you know, the water profile is incredibly important to give you that crispness, to give you that bitterness. But at the same time, the yeast is also very important. Now, we have some detailed notes on yeast. I'm joking. We really don't.
Super detailed.
Just Chico.
Essentially, any clean US yeast,
US05.
but specifically 05, Bry 97, WLP 001, anything Chico predominantly, something clean that's going to give you a nice clean flavor profile, allow those hops to come through. And then there's a specific note which is written underneath which says that Andy recommends Voss for extra orangey vibes.
Yep. How
do you feel about that, Tricky?
Well, I was drinking my own West Coast with Voss in it earlier, and like I said, I mean, it does like 100%. It does amp up the sort of orangey, pithy kind of, citrus rind kind of flavors, but it wouldn't. If that's what you want, I'd say go for it. For me, I would probably still prefer going back to a cleaner yeast.
That's all right.
Yeah,
that's all right.
I mean, I've also sort of like, I think one thing to point out here is a lot of people will go, oh, right, okay, so US05, Bry 97, the liquid equivalents, they're all the same. There's a lot of people out there saying that they're not, and in my experience, they're definitely not. Like US05 is massively different to Bry 97, and
I'm sorry, my scientist is just perked up and went,
yeah, this is cool.
Not.
I'm interested.
No, like the like the Y Yeast and even the White Labs liquid equivalents. I mean, for me, I've just found like US05, like the main difference you'll see for me is like the flocculation, which I'm sure we'll all have picked up on. Like, there's a big difference between US05 and the other ones. But also the clarity of flavor as well. So I think US05 is probably the least clean out of those ones for me, because it's actually
peach esters.
Everyone says like peach esters, especially when it goes warmer or colder. I can't remember, but one side of sort of 20 degrees, they say it gets more.
A 19 I normally do, so maybe colder.
But yeah, I'm moving towards on the dry yeast, like Bry 97, more for me now. If you're looking for like a West Coast style kind of clarity of flavor, and I've always found that the White Labs like Chico strain is for me is probably a little bit more true to source maybe than the US05. Anyway, I don't know if anyone else has any opinions on those.
Well, from the chat, we have a very clear opinion from the Swedish chef, and that is Hornidal.
No.
No, Hornidal apparently can ferment quite clean. Lutra is an option.
If I was going to go with any of the quite yeast, I'd go
fucking
Lutra.
Tricky, for God's sake.
No.
We're going to get a massive rant about how it's not a fucking beer.
Give me the right of reply. Like, as a clean yeast, I would use that above all the other ones.
Everyone just take a moment.
I thought you'd use 3470 at fucking 20 degrees.
Take a deep breath.
Yeah.
All right.
Actually, no, you raise a good point. I would actually say like 3470, just brewing at ale temperatures, might be a really good shout for like West Coast style beers. I don't know whether that makes it a cold IPA or an IPL or a warm IPL, what the fuck it does, but It ferments really
I
clean still.
I think they call it a lukewarm
IPA, but it ferments
I'm
really
sitting
clean.
here getting more and more
ale
pissed
temps.
off by the minute. I'll be honest.
So why not fuck off all of the quike yeast and just use 3470 at ale temps? I mean,
Because
it's
they
an
don't
option.
give you orange esters, so Andy'd be disappointed.
I don't want orange esters.
Well,
you
know,
you can buy USO5 by the brick for about 30-40 quid and save yourself a fortune.
I do have an additional view on something that Jimmy from Unity told me about how he uses WHC yeast, and I think Matt that we spoke to on Wednesday from Track was also
talking about
that they use WHC, and apparently WHC are like really leading the game in terms of kind of yeast production, I think. And the LAX yeast, which is the Chico strain, is apparently absolutely brilliant.
Somebody needs to send WHC an email.
Oh yeah, that'd be cool.
Yeah. So I need to start using more WHC yeasts. I think I've only ever really used their quite yeasts.
LAX is that one that they do in dry form, or is that just liquid?
I think they do it in a dried form as well. So I think they do it in homebrew format as well.
Yeah, guys, you can get it from Cross Maloof. I'm sure supply WHC. If
they do, definitely. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
there you go.
It's right there.
Chris has got
a packet. So I think if I was going to make a West Coast IPA, I'd probably check out WHC.
See, the thing is, with all the different yeast companies, it gets confusing. You're like, is LAX like just their USO5, or is it their like dry version of the?
But it literally says on the packet USO5 equivalent.
Yeah.
No, I know, but obviously there's like a question of whether they've just literally taken that strain, or
no.
Do you know what I mean? Like, is that their own version,
USO5?
Or are they literally
apparently it's loads better than USO5?
All I've got to say at this point is, it's your boat, you paddle it.
Yeah.
No, it's better than USO5.
Well, USO5.
I think the takeaway there is like a lot of people will say, oh, they're all just clean yeast, they're all the same, but they're not. There's a lot of difference between all of those strains, which are theoretically supposed to all originate from the same source, and there's either been sort of progression once they've gone out to the different manufacturers, or they've just taken a different
point mutations.
Yeah. So it's not. Yeah, they're not the same. There's no way they're the same, because they've literally got different characteristics on the the spec sheet. First of all,
if you brew the same beer, make a 40-litre batch, take 20 litres, and
tell you what, a really good experiment for the podcast would be doing a like clean West Coast style ale yeast comparison brew with lots of those strains.
But
I'm not going to do it, but somebody should.
Yeah.
No, because we'd be doing a live tasting of it on a pod rather than a made up.
We need somebody with a YouTube channel.
Did I say that?
where there's no difference.
Yeah.
Yeah, nobody could actually tell the difference between the beers.
Yeah. But we did do a triangle test. I think that we can sit here and we can argue, and I take it all in good banter. I think 3470 personally would be a great choice for a Westie. I do.
Hey!
Genuinely, because the cleanliness of that beer that you sent me, that 3470, I think you did it at like 10 psi and 19 degrees. I can't remember the exact values.
Yeah.
I didn't get any kind of off flavor or any kind of fruity flavor or anything like that in that beer. I thought that was really nice.
You can do it without the pressure though as well. That's what I'm saying. Like
you can do it with Global as well. Was it Global?
Global's supposedly the liquid equivalent as well, but yeah.
Was it Global? Yeah, it was Global.
It might have been Global, the one I sent you. Yeah.
Chris just likes using the wrong yeast for the.
I like.
So when he's brewing lagers, he uses ale yeast, and when he's brewing ales, he's using lager yeast.
Fuck the convention. I just think that I think there's a lot to be said for selecting something which has characteristics which are appropriate to what you're trying to brew. That's where I think, So we're coming towards the end of this podcast, and I want to bring in that we have sat all the way through this podcast and we've banged on about Pliny the Elder, we've banged on about Bell's Two-Hearted, and I'm not being funny, I'm incredibly disappointed with you three guys that you did not remember. I'm disappointed with myself as well.
Yeah.
But I'm disappointed that you did not remember Stone IPA.
Oh,
Don't really like it.
It's a fucking classic. It's a classic.
I've never been that taken with any of the Stone beers, to be brutally honest. Like, it's just not. I know it's one of those like breweries that was Stone Brewery. You know, they've got all these
really bitter
white beers, but yeah,
they tend to be really bitter and just
I'm not sure if I've ever drunk any actually. I mean, I'm infinitely aware of them, but I've never sought out any of their beers. But
Trendsetter is one of the originals. Stone IPA.
I mean, to be fair, like I'll take your point. They should have been mentioned in the general sort of discussion of trendsetter.
But we didn't mention Anchor Brewing. We didn't mention.
No, true. Yeah,
Lime,
I mean, our Westie history
mention,
section was shit. To be fair, it was just
Well, we kind of leaned on the fact that there was some better research,
better content out there by more prepared people,
and we just critiqued it. So that's fine. It's fine.
Yeah. So the last thing that we need to cover in this particular podcast, completely glossing over the fact that we all forgot a fucking true trendsetter in the IPA movement. What about homebrew examples? Tricky, I know you've brewed a few. Owen has as well. And have you brewed much in the way of Westies?
Yeah, I've got one in the fridge.
Yeah, I brewed one, and it turned out really nice. It turned out so well that one of my friends came round and had a pint, and then swapped me the keg. So I ended up having like a pint and a half, which it was decent. It was decent. You know what I mean?
What did you swap it for? Out of interest,
I swapped it for his American Amber.
All right.
Was Pale Fire? Pale Fire was it not West Coast IPA?
West Coast Pale, I think. More
was it Pale?
Yeah.
More along lines of this than kind of anything else. No, I swapped it for an American Amber because he'd put a really eclectic hop bill in there. He'd done his bitterness with Mittelfru, and then he'd put Saz at about 10 minutes, and then dry hopped it with Centennial, Cascade, and Citra.
I've got one here called West Coast IPA as the actual name of the beer.
It made for a really nice beer, Owen. You're looking at me kind of.
Oh, no, I was just contemplating the fact that actually sounds like almost your perfect beer.
It weren't far off, mate. It was fucking lovely.
It was basically a reasonably reasonably dark beer with German hops in the boil with American hops in the dry hop.
Yeah,
Chris is a happy man.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
I mean,
he's all over that one.
I will say as well, when I read the grain bill, because he showed me his what do you call it? It was brewer's friend at the time. He'd used Pilsner malt as the base, and he'd used Vienna for a little bit of colour, and then he'd use Munich 2 and Munich to blend the colour out to where he wanted it. It was a really nice beer that really worked very... Oh, and he'd fermented it out with... fucking hell, what did he ferment it out? He sent me the recipe, hang on.
Voss?
No, it wasn't a quike. It was before the quike.
USO5.
It wasn't USO5. It was fucking hell.
Yes.
Hang on. I'm trying to find the recipe. Give me a second.
3470.
Talk amongst yourselves.
Yeah, I don't think I've done loads of West Coast IPAs. I've already talked about the fact that I did the Firestone Walker.
Boddingtons. It fermented it out with Boddingtons.
Boddingtons, interesting choice.
It was a great beer. It was really nice. He didn't like it because it was a bit too fruity for him, so he swapped it for me. But the fucking hell, it worked. It worked really well.
Oh, one of the best sort of West Coast style IPAs that I did, which unfortunately I probably won't ever brew again because it was just made up of like totally random bag ends of hops that I had left over. Was I called it barrel scraper IPA because it was scraping the barrel of leftover shit that was in the ingredients list. But the malt bill kind of followed the sort of structure that we talked about, as it was a little bit lower on the caramel malt, so it's probably a little bit more towards the sort of slightly lighter modern interpretation of Westie. But I had 5.5 kilos of Pilsen in there, or what was it, Dingermans? Yeah, it might have been Dingermans Pilsner. 650 grams of Munich, which equated to about 10%, and then 250 grams of caramel. Didn't get the peanuts though, Chris, before you ask. This was a 23-litre batch, by the way. And then the random hops I was using up were Bravo and Calypso, because I think I had like leftovers from a Beavertown Gamma Ray clone that I'd made.
Oh, yeah.
They have Bravo and Calypso in that beer quite heavily. So I had random leftovers of that. So I put Bravo's really high alpha, so that was in at 60 minutes, 25 grams. So I went pretty heavy on the like 60-minute boil edition for IBUs. Total was 65 IBUs at the end, by the way. So 25 grams Bravo, 10 grams Bravo and Calypso at 10 minutes, and then I added in some Simcoe and Citra as well. So there was Simcoe, Calypso, and Citra in the hop stand, and then more Simcoe, Citra, and Calypso in the dry hop. I'm pretty sure I did a video on this one. So if you want to get the full recipe, you can go and find that. But yeah, not the classic sort of West Coast IPA hops that we were talking about before, apart from the Simcoe, I guess. But I think Bravo's definitely one that you can look at for this sort of style of beer, because it's quite high alpha for a start, so you'll definitely get the bitterness with it, but there's some, I think you get quite a sort of orangey flavor off of it if you put it in later as well. And I have no idea what Calypso does. I still can't remember what that actually added to the beer, but it works quite well with Citra and Simcoe for me anyway. So yeah,
I've not used either of those hops. I've not a clue.
I've just been sat here muted. I've realised
6.6%. Were you talking, Chris? Sorry,
I was talking fucking loads. Bravo is a fantastic hop, especially early on, but it also works really well in a dry hop.
No, I was going to say, I think it's one of those ones that was traditionally just a bittering hop, and then a few people realised that it's actually like really flavoursome if you put it in later on.
Also, Calypso, if you use Calypso and Comet together, it actually gives you this really kind of interesting, it gives you pine, but with quite a large amount of what I can only describe as like papaya over the top of it. And it works really well. It's a very underrated hop, is Calypso. It's also quite a difficult hop to get a hold of, weirdly enough. I don't think they grow a lot of it.
There's a lot of those sort of weird hops, like weird American hops that like just don't really feature in modern craft beer brewing, right? You just
Calypso's underrated.
Well, I think there's a few like this one. It seems like certain people pick them up and they get used in a particular beer, but then it doesn't really take off. Like when it gets to the point where it's been named, you sort of think they're probably hoping that it's gonna like, you know, get really popular and maybe
be the next Citra, be the next
Mosaic. Maybe that one didn't quite make it. Apart from Beavertown, who probably got a massive contract for it. So
Calypso's fucking underrated.
Assuming they're still using it in Gamma Ray, because I mean that beer was another one that kind of went downhill quite badly, I thought, but they did get bought out and all the rest of it. Blah blah
they don't
blah.
know
Corporate takeover.
It's a 50% takeover by Heineken. So
this is where we need to really get. We need to speak to Robbie, and we need to get one of those blokes from one of the hop growers on, so that we can get a really good sort of idea of what it is that makes the. Obviously, sellability is going to be a big thing, but Calypso, I think, is massively underrated, especially for the Westie market. You know, Centennial, Citra, and Calypso. I had a beer when I was in Atlanta. It was a tiny wee fucking microbrewery. In fact, I'm pretty sure it was a brew pub rather than a microbrewery. And I remember having one of their beers, and it was Citra, Calypso, and Centennial. And I remember drinking at least fucking 8 or 9 pints of that. And it was a big beer as well. Americans, for their, small beers, they tend to stick around about 6%. I remember sitting and drinking that and eating a fuck ton of burgers and fucking ribs. And that being an absolute banger.
Well, all to you to get through that many pints of that. Baby.
Oh, I wasn't driving. Somebody else was. And I think I threw up in the car on the way home. So,
Class.
oh, mate, skills. In fact, oh, shit, Owen's gone.
Owen was disgusted with your comments and thought we had to leave.
Gone. No, I had it was a rough journey. The roads in Atlanta are not the best. And I remember being in the back seat of the SUV. It was a Ford Explorer. I remember winding the window down and chucking out the window as we went along. He's back. Yeah, man. Proper full-blown Huey Green.
Yeah, no, I'm kind of with you, Chris, because in its heyday, and like Gamma Ray was one of my favorite beers. Like when
it's a fucking banger.
That was quite caramelly, wasn't it?
Yeah, I think they had a fair bit of caramel in there, but yeah, it's one of those. I think it's one of those, like we've talked about it before, kind of like supporting kind of scaffolding hops, where like if you just put it into the blend, it can just give you that little bit of extra je ne sais quoi, whatever to the hop mix. So, terroir, bit of whatever you want to call it. But it was like I say, I couldn't tell you what it added to that beer, but it just that made a fantastic beer for me. And it was like, again, one of those where I was a little bit disappointed because I'm not really going to buy that hop again just purely to make this, but maybe I should because it was good.
Anyway, I'm going to propose we close this episode off because I think we are just rambling on about various hops and.
This is the hop.
Do you think we've reached the point where we're just talking shit?
Yeah, we're just talking shit now. Come on.
Well, I was trying to give everyone a rundown of a successful homebrew recipe, but
it was good.
Just watch his videos.
I mean, admittedly, I've got nothing else to give. So unless anyone else has got a West Coast homebrew recipe,
I think we should close it out happily on that 2.5 hour discussion on West Coast IPAs.
Yeah. Okay, in that case, what I'm going to do is I'm going to jump in here and I'm going to say to the guys, I will be posting a link to the after party. I'm not sure how many people are going to be sticking around for how long, but the wife's already messaged me to say she's in bed, so I've got at least an hour. So I'm going to throw up a connection to the room, and then I'm going to throw up a password. And I have to say thank you guys, because this has been educational for me since I'm brewing a West Coast style beer pretty soon. I've really enjoyed the input from you lads. And I've also enjoyed the little bits of knowledge that you guys have brought in from other places. It's going to really help me to develop my beer in a quite an interesting way. So I love you guys very much. And that's the reason why.
Oh, thanks, Chris.
Oh, Chris, that's the nicest thing you've ever said to me on the pod.
The most heartfelt closeouts of the podcast I think I've ever heard.
I mean, don't think this means I'm not your. Don't think that this means I don't think you're all absolute cunts, because I do. But
and there we go.
Love you all very much.
There we go.
Straight back to normal. I knew it wouldn't last long.
You rode that wave backwards.
Yeah. Anyway, well, Andy, Owen, I love you guys.
Yeah, you guys are the best, apart from Chris, who's a cunt.
Chris, he's a cunt.
Yep, I am a cunt. This is very true. So, guys, thank you very much for listening. Episode 50 in the bag. And a huge thanks to all the people who contributed to this episode, specifically the guy from Robbie from Yakima Chief, to what's his name from Unity? Jimmy, that's the fella. And everybody else who's had any kind of input to this particular... I am pissed as a cunt. And thanks very much to anybody who has thrown down and left us a comment, and we appreciate it. Thanks to all of our Patreons, and thanks very much to our sponsors, Brewcake Tap. This is episode 50. It is in the bag, and I think we should all just say bye-bye right about now.
Yeah, bye.
Cool.
Catch you later.
Peace out, guys.
Layers.
Right, the password's going up in the chat for you boys, and we hope to see you on the after party in a couple of moments. Bye.
Ta-ra.
Bye-bye.
Right,
Intense
that's all got to be stopped.
episode. Where was Brett? Where was Brooksy?
Brett and Brooksy are both knee deep in their misses.
Like I should be.
Right, I am stopping the stream.
I really hoped he's